Chapter 774. That night. Yunyang lay in his room watching the dark night outside through the window. His gaze flickered as he pondered. After a long time he murmured, "Bao, or right now he can already sit on the position of crown prince. He's more than qualified." Yunyang was not the only one who had such thoughts. The next morning. Without another word, the emperor immediately issued an edict. The mediocre king is not to remain in the capital any longer. He is to head to his fief immediately. This mediocre king was the title of the former crown prince, the current second prince. Compared to Bao's youthful wisdom, the title of the former crown prince and the current mediocre king was also appropriate. The next imperial edict was to confer the title of the first prince's son, Yu Qingquan, as the crown prince's grandson. The whole nation will celebrate and the world will be pardoned. The civil and military officials accepted the decree in unison. Now that Yutang's conquest was in full swing, it looked like it was about to conquer the world. Conferring the title of national heir at this point in time would remove all future worries. His Majesty's swift and decisive style was on full display. That afternoon, the mediocre king departed with only 808 men in his entourage, leaving Tiantang City, the capital of Yutang. Wu Ying of the Ministry of Military Affairs had specifically requested that the mediocre king's ceremonial procession be approved by the Board of Rites, and that the Ministry of Military Affairs had to go through it again to prevent any unruly individuals from sneaking in. The Ministry of Rites naturally did not dare to delay. After the approval, it was immediately sent to the Ministry of War. Wu Ying personally took charge of the matter and did not slack in the slightest. He strictly controlled the entire process, eliminating all irrelevant personnel, including the Liangdi, the palace maids, the mediocre king's concubines, the accompanying eunuchs and the guards. He only managed to gather a small number of people. Including the mediocre king himself, there were exactly 809 of them. Thus he immediately ordered them to set out. 809. When the mediocre king found out about the head count, he stared blankly for a long while. Only after a long while, as if he had come to a realization, did he throw his head back and let out a bitter laugh. Then with a sudden wah, he spat out a mouthful of blood. 809, 809. Was this retribution? In front of the gate. There were only a few officials who came out to send them off. Instead, it was the Minister of Justice, Wu Lai, who had always been at odds with the mediocre king, who came out to send them off. The mediocre king was dressed in green robes as he turned to look at the city gates. His handsome face was filled with desolation and despair as he fell to his knees and kowtowed 9 times towards the city gates. "Imperial Father, I will never be able to see you again after today." Tears streamed down the mediocre king's face as he said, "May you take care of yourself and live a long life." Consort Yong comforted him gently, "Your Highness, although this journey is long, it's not impossible for us to return to the capital in the future. You shouldn't be discouraged and unable to recover from this setback." The mediocre king shook his head sadly, unwilling to say another word. He boarded the carriage and headed south. No one understood better than him why his entourage was so small. And why were there 809 people? Even if they were demoted, even if the monkeys would scatter when the tree falls, even if they hit them when they were down, how could they only have a guard of honor of 800 people? Where did the escorting soldiers go? Even if only the people from the original crown prince's residence followed him, there would be more than 800 of them. However, these 808 people reminded the former crown prince of something that he had not heard of for a long time. During the battle at Tianshan Cliff, when the 9 supremes met with misfortune, there were also 809 people accompanying them. The 9 supremes had brought along 800 guardians. 808 people had died in the battle at Tianshan Cliff. It was almost a complete wipeout. Supreme Cloud was the only survivor. Even though he had stirred up a storm upon his return, the 9 supremes had remained hidden behind the scenes. Ever since then, the 9 supremes had remained hidden behind the scenes. Be it those who had sacrificed themselves or those who had survived. Now that he had been demoted, the number of people accompanying him, including himself, was coincidentally 809. What did this mean? What did it mean? The mediocre king knew better than anyone else. His entourage was doomed. There would be no more fluke. There would never be a survivor like Supreme Cloud. Since the other party had made such an arrangement, they must have clearly confirmed that he was involved in the incident at Tianshan Cliff. Thinking deeper, the number of people accompanying him was the final approval of the Board of Military. Did this not mean that there were more problems? This was definitely not an accident or a coincidence. It was a dead end, a path to hell, or perhaps, a path of no return. These 800 people were all his confidants, all of them were his loyal followers. These 800 people were his burial objects. Not a single one of them would survive. This was a foregone conclusion. 3 days later, the mediocre king and his entourage passed by Songlong Ridge. They set up camp and rested there that night. It was midnight when a strong wind blew, accompanied by thunder and lightning and a torrential downpour. The next morning, no one came out from the campsite. It was unusually quiet. When the local officials received the news and went to investigate, they saw that there were 809 corpses lying neatly on the ground in the entire campsite. There were no exceptions. They were arranged neatly and clearly. The one at the front was the mediocre king himself. It was as if the 809 people had fallen asleep. In the tent, there were 4 words written by the mediocre king himself: "You deserve it." On a rock next to the tent, someone had written a few lines of words in blood. "When a prince breaks the law, he shall be punished the same as the people. Blood for blood, a tooth for a tooth. When the grudge is settled, the debt of blood shall be paid in blood." At this moment, in a roadside 300 miles away from Songlong Ridge, a skinny young man had ordered a few jars of wine and a few side dishes, eating and drinking quietly. After a long time he murmured, "Big Brother Supreme Wind, I Shui Wuin, am a man of my word. I have avenged you." He lowered his head quietly, looking at the wine in his bowl and chuckling bitterly. "Lord Supreme Cloud meant to kill only the mediocre king, not the innocent. But I couldn't hold it in. I didn't want to kill just one person, I only wanted to kill 809 people." He laughed out loud. How satisfying. He stood up abruptly and threw down 2,000 silver taels, buying all the wine in the inn. Then he poured them all onto the ground, laughing. He knelt before the fragrant wine stains on the floor and kowtowed a few times. His green robe fluttered as he left. The Board of Military. Wu Ying's courtyard. "Sir Wu, your humble servant has failed in his task. I've come to accept my punishment." By the time your humble servant arrived, His Highness the mediocre king and his entourage of 809 people were all dead. No one survived. It's written on the rock next to the tent. "When a prince breaks the law, he shall be punished the same as the people. Blood for blood, a tooth for a tooth. When the grudge is settled, the debt of blood shall be paid in blood." These 24 words in blood indicate that someone has made their move in advance. Sir, what should we do?" "Sil. Your humble servant understands. Go. Your humble servant shall take his leave." The man in black retreated out of the tent. Wu Ying paced slowly to the window. Looking at the moon in the sky, he suddenly heaved a long sigh of relief and murmured, "Dead?" A cloud drifted over, blocking the moonlight. The sky was filled with a haze. I've purposely given the order 2 hours later. Someone has indeed made their move in advance. Chapter 775. Almost at the same time, the 10 kings of the concourse of the underworld, their masters, and the last 2 remaining gold-ranked assassins were gathered in a gloomy valley. Who else could it be other than Yun Yang, who stood in front of the concourse of the underworld in a fluttering purple robe? When I was investigating Sister Lan's whereabouts the other day, I accidentally discovered that the condensed Yin energy here was different from usual. Yun Yang stood with his hands behind his back, looking at the other side of the mountain range in the shadows. Out of curiosity, I investigated and accidentally discovered that there was a dense and massive amount of Yin energy hidden under this mountain range. After careful investigation, I confirmed that there was indeed a massive amount of Yin energy here, and it was controlled by a mechanism. In other words, this place was man-made. However, Yin energy is not necessary for my cultivation method, and I can't convert it into my own cultivation base or combat power. It's like sitting on a mountain of treasure, but it's hard to put it to use. It was only after I befriended King Qingguang that I realized that this Yin energy is an excellent resource that the concourse of the underworld needs. To confirm this, I went here again to search for the source of the mechanism. As expected, I found the opening, and I can basically say with certainty. Yun Yang said faintly, "This place should be another haunting temple." Haunting temple. Upon hearing this, the eyes of the kings of the 10 kings brightened, their expressions inexplicably excited. That day their cultivation base had greatly improved because they had entered the haunting temple by chance and obtained a large amount of Yin energy. It was also because of this that they were fated to be with the 9 Supremes. If this place was really the haunting temple, then it was related to the 9 Supremes. Thinking of this, the expressions of the kings were unusually complicated, and they were speechless for a long time. The leader of the concourse of the underworld was a man in black, shrouded in a faint but solid fog. His cultivation base was obviously higher than that of the 10 Yama kings. This person was the true master of the concourse of the underworld, the master of the 10 kings of the 10 palaces whom Yunyang had never met. His expression was solemn as he slowly walked forward, looking for the key of the mechanism. As expected, according to what Yunyang had said, he found an inconspicuous protruding rock somewhere. The man in black didn't delay or hesitate. He circulated his chi and pressed it down. A moment later, a series of light sounds rang out and a large hole suddenly appeared in front of him. The hole that had suddenly appeared was not very big, at most the size of a bedroom. It was filled with an extremely dark and ghostly aura, a sinister atmosphere that kept people away from it. However, the people from the concourse of the underworld were overjoyed when they saw it. It was because the dark and empty space was clearly a dark fog that was close to materializing. Upon closer inspection they could see that at the end of the dark fog, there were 10 luminous pearls hanging in the air, emitting a dense fog. That's right, this is the other haunting temple. First Court King Qingguang exclaimed in delight. Although the concourse of the underworld is known as the leader of the world's top 3 assassin organizations, ultimately, it's hard to live up to our reputation. Most of it stems from the people's fear of our gloomy aura. That day when the 10 of them were promoted, it was their fate, and they even benefited from the help of a few venerable ones led by Lord Supreme Earth. The haunting temple is hidden beneath the earth. Earth is the earth, the head of the 9 supremes. In order not to forget this kindness, from today onwards, I shall change my name to Xidigarba. The master of the kings of the 10 palaces turned around and bowed deeply to Yunyang with a solemn expression. Senior, you don't have to do this. Yunyang was stunned by the sudden change, not knowing how to react. Since I've done what I've done, I've made up my mind. Supreme Cloud need not worry. Xidigarba sucked in a deep breath and turned his head to say, the 10 of you, cover the 10 abyssal essence pearls with your right hands according to your respective positions. Circulate your chi with all your might to open the haunting temple. The kings of the 10 palaces answered and stepped forward. Each of them took a deep breath and extended a hand to cover the 10 abyssal essence pearls. It was probably not the first time they had done this with all their might, so the process was smooth without any hiccups. As far as the eye could see, the abnormally thick fog of the underworld seemed to have gone berserk, growing thicker and thicker in the blink of an eye. Even with Yunyang's eyesight, he could not see his own fingers even if he stretched them out. This went on for a while before the valley was suddenly plunged into an atmosphere of violent tremors. For a moment the mountains shook and the earth quaked, as if an earth dragon was flipping over. However, everyone present was extremely powerful. To them this little bit of noise was not a big deal at all. The tremors only lasted for a moment, until the center of the empty space surrounded by the 10 abyssal essence pearls slowly collapsed, and the tremors gradually stopped. At this moment, everyone's attention was focused on a huge, pitch-black palace that gradually revealed itself before their eyes. Suddenly, a few words darker than the darkness flashed across, haunting temple of the heavens. The palace's doors slowly opened after the black words flashed past. The interior of the palace was even darker, leading straight to the underground. No one knew how deep it was. Xidigarba, master of the 10 court Yama kings, took a deep breath and said solemnly, I thank young Master Yun for your help once again. However, young Master, and our help has reached its limit. This realm can only be entered by those who cultivate the ethereal force. It will only bring harm to young Master and we won't be able to come out in a short period of time. Therefore please take care, young Master. We shall meet again. I look forward to the day we meet again, young Master. Yunyang said. Yunyang understands. Everyone please do as you please. As the senior has said, we will definitely meet again in the future. The 10 court kings stepped forward one by one to bid farewell to Yunyang, each of them exuding a sense of reluctance to part. Among them, First Court King Qingguang was the most prominent. He was the first to meet Yunyang and had interacted with him the most. This king was the most straightforward, so seeing that Yunyang was about to leave, he nagged for a long time. Just as the concourse of the underworld was about to enter the haunting temple and draw a temporary halt to their journey, a voice suddenly rang out, "Wait." Everyone turned to look at the source of the voice, their hearts alarmed. Could there be someone spying on them somewhere else? Murderous intent permeated the air. Combined with the aura of the netherworld, even the real flurry of ghosts would not be as strong as this. The 10 court kings and Xidigarba stared at the source of the voice with unprecedented sharpness. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, 2 silhouettes flew over from the shadows in the distance. As they approached, they saw that the newcomers were the 2 assassin leaders, Hen Bieli and Hong Zhan. The concourse of the underworld, the Hall of Crimson Blade, and the Merciless Tower, the three top assassin organizations in the world had been at each other's throats for a long time. Now that they had met, it went without saying that they were exceptionally jealous. First Court King Qingguang pressed his hand on the hilt of his sword and said eerily, "What are you doing here? Are you intending to borrow our hands to go to the underworld?" As they spoke, they had led each other to the extreme. In spite of this, Hen Bieli and Hong Zhan were calm and composed, without a hint of hostility. They first greeted Yun Yang before speaking to Xidigarba sternly. "The two of us have come here with the intention of joining the concourse of the underworld and being apprenticed to Senior. I wonder if Senior is willing to accept us?" Chapter 776. Both of you want to join the concourse of the underworld? You want to be apprenticed to our master? First Court King Qingguang's eyes almost popped out of their sockets when he heard the answer. It was not only King Qingguang, the other 9 court Yama kings were in disbelief as well. Even Yun Yang was dumbfounded, not knowing what was going on. What was going on? The leader of the Merciless Tower, the leader of the Hall of Crimson Blade, the masterminds of 2 major assassin organizations, any one of them was higher in status than Emperor Song, the head of the 10 court Yama kings. They were probably only slightly below the Yama king's master, Xidigarba. Even though the 2 organizations had suffered a great loss in strength, they should not have to rely on others. But these 2 people said these words under the watchful eyes of the crowd. How could it not cause people to be extremely astonished and indescribably shocked? I know that our words are hard to convince, but we're sincere in wanting to join the concourse of the underworld. To show our sincerity, both of us are willing to make a heaven's oath. If we violate it, we'll be doomed eternally, Hen Bieli said sincerely, looking at the crowd's expressions. Why? Even someone as experienced and steady as Xidigarba could not help but feel curious. These 3 words could be said to be the voice of everyone present. Making a heaven's oath was not a joke, it was a promise that could not be faked. Hong Zhan and Hen Bieli would basically be tied to the concourse of the underworld for the rest of their lives from now on. The price they had to pay was actually negligible. However, how could these 2 men make such a decision? If it was only to gain the trust of others, they did not have to go to such lengths. Hen Bieli chuckled bitterly. I know what we're saying sounds absurd and hard for anyone to believe. However, after the battle in Tiantang City, we brothers have been blinded by greed. We've set our minds on the Dragonhide treasure map without a care in the world. Because of this, the entire Tianshan continent's assassin base has been destroyed in this battle. Although Hen Bieli's tone was bitter, his articulation was unusually clear. There was no hesitation. It was obvious that he had thought about this matter many times during this period of time. The assassin industry in Tianshan continent can be said to have reached the lowest point of its history. It's almost hopeless. Both of us have let down the ancestors of the assassin world. Hong Zhan continued, throughout the entire continent, the only assassin organization whose structure is still intact is the concourse of the underworld. Big Brother and I have discussed it. For the rest of our lives, we don't seek to restore the glory of the past. We just want to preserve the lifeline of the assassin business. That's good enough. Based on this, although it seems absurd for us to join the concourse of the underworld, it is, in fact, the best choice for us. As long as we join the concourse of the underworld, not only will our own safety be guaranteed, the families of the brothers who eat with us will also have a source of income. Of course, the most important thing is to let the profession of assassins continue to exist in Tianshan Jianghu. Hen Bieli nodded, his eyes gleaming with deep emotion. I don't want the profession of assassins to go into decline. I'm not trying to be sentimental when I say that. Although we're down and out and have a lot of enemies with our capabilities and heritage, it's not difficult for us to seek a peaceful life. We are all assassins, so we naturally know that although we are assassins who pay for our lives, it is still a profession passed down from generation to generation. Assassins are the hands that hold the power of life and death. Perhaps the people of the entire continent will not approve of it, and may even want us to get rid of it as soon as possible. However, this hand that holds the power of life and death cannot be lost from our hands, and we are unwilling to see this profession disappear from the world. Therefore, our visit today is not to seek cooperation but to join. We are willing to make the heaven's oath. This is our sincerity and also the biggest guarantee we can give. Hen Bieli was dressed in white while Hong Zhan was dressed in black. Both of them stood like javelins, waiting for Xidigarba and the 10 kings to reply. Xidigarba frowned and said, I completely believe what all of you have said. However, when it comes to joining the concourse of the underworld, it can't be concluded with just a few words. Everything else is fine, but all of you are the pinnacle powerhouses of this world, and your cultivation has formed its own system. The concourse of the underworld's cultivation, on the other hand, is unique, different from all the cultivation methods in the entire continent. This point alone has already negated the possibility of all of you wanting to join the concourse of the underworld. Let me ask you something. If you wish to join the concourse of the underworld, you will need to cultivate from the beginning, cultivating a cultivation method that is completely different from your original cultivation method. In other words, the profound cultivation base you possess is now the biggest obstacle for you to join the concourse of the underworld. Not only will those cultivation bases not be of any benefit to the concourse of the underworld's unique skill, they will greatly harm you instead. Are you really willing to give up your cultivation base and cultivate from the beginning? This question made the 10 kings of the concourse of the underworld frown, all of them smiling bitterly. Xidigarba's words had hit the nail on the head. It was sharp and even harsh, but it was also an unavoidable point. If they could not reach a consensus on this point, no matter how much sincerity Hen Bieli and Hong Zhan displayed, it would all be nonsense. However, asking these pinnacle powerhouses to cripple their own cultivation base and cultivate from the beginning with a single sentence? This was no different from a fool's dream. At the very least, the 10 kings of the underworld would never be willing to cripple their own cultivation base and cultivate from the beginning. Were willing? Contrary to everyone's expectations, Hen Bieli and Hong Zhan agreed without hesitation. The group was speechless for a long while. Did they really agree? Why did they agree just like that? Did they have to agree so readily? Senior Rong Bing, the reason we agreed to cripple our own cultivation base and cultivate from the beginning is no doubt to express our sincerity, but it is also out of selfishness. As the pinnacle cultivators of this world, we know ourselves best. How could we not know that our cultivation method has no higher inheritance? Our cultivation path can be said to be cut off. Although we have yet to reach the pinnacle, we are already far away from it. However, if we continue on and set foot on the pinnacle, we will only be further away from the true path of cultivation. Looking at this world, to surpass the limits of this world, only the complete cultivation method of the concourse of the underworld can allow us to go further and set foot on a higher level. Hen Bieli was slightly embarrassed as he said, "In fact, this is the main reason we are here this time." I see. Xidigarba frowned in deep thought and said, "If that's the case, the concourse of the underworld can accept you, but you still have to make a heavenly oath. After joining the concourse of the underworld, you must cripple your entire cultivation base before you can switch to cultivating the concourse of the underworld's cultivation method. As long as you fulfill these two requirements, I will allow you to join the concourse of the underworld and grant you the position of guardian." Hen Bieli and Hong Zhan exchanged glances and nodded immediately. They then knelt on the spot and made the heavenly oath. Then they kowtowed 3 times and kowtowed 9 times to Xidigarba, meticulously performing the ritual of acknowledging him as their master. Both of you joining the concourse of the underworld is to continue the profession of assassins. The concourse of the underworld controls the life and death of the world, so the 2 of you will be in charge. Xidigarba said, "The 2 of you, one in black and one in white, will take up these 2 positions, black and white impermanence. Once the impermanence appears, there is only death and no life." Yes. Chapter 777. Watching the people of the concourse of the underworld enter the haunting temple in a single file, the fog-shrouded door slowly closed. Then the entire mountain trembled as the haunting temple sank into the ground, never to be seen again. Yunyang was speechless. Even as intelligent as he was, he would never have dreamed that something like this would happen. Hen Bieli, Hong Zhan, the merciless tower master and the leader of Crimson Blade Hall had been taken in by the concourse of the underworld, just like that. They had taken the initiative to seek refuge. No matter how high-sounding and sincere the 2 men's reasons were, Yunyang still felt that something was amiss. These reasons did not seem to be sufficient for Hen Bieli and Hong Zhan to make such a decision. What was the reason though? Yunyang could not figure it out no matter how hard he thought about it. Alright, forget it. We've been delayed for so long. Finally, there's nothing to do for now. Let's go to the battlefield in the west quickly. Don't let any accidents happen. Yunyang turned into a storm and soared into the sky, heading west. Hen Bieli, what's the real reason? The real reason is very simple. It's when I've cultivated to the peak recently, trying to break through to a higher level. While I was meditating, someone kept saying, "Life and death are fated, there's only the concourse of the underworld. If you wish to live forever, go straight to hell." Hen Bieli chuckled bitterly. It's like a call from fate. At first, we thought it was an illusion, a devil in our hearts, but Hong Zhan had received the same message as well. He believed the message to be true. Furthermore, after the two of us verified it again and again, we confirmed that the message wasn't from an outsider but an inexplicable thought that came from our own hearts. It was real. We've discussed it for a long time before we finally decided to look for you. Then why didn't you say it outside? Actually, we've been here for a few days. We've seen you snatch the Dragon Hide treasure map with our own eyes. We've also seen you return the treasure map to young Master Yun. We know that this is actually young Master Yun's setup. Regardless of the cause of this incident, young Master Yun has saved our lives, but all in all we're quite conflicted. We're even worried that this is a secret that belongs only to the concourse of the underworld. If we were to reveal it and it turns out to be something you've kept a secret. So it's quite complicated. First Court King Qingguang and the rest burst into laughter, looking at Hen Bieli and Hong Zhan's conflicted expressions. He finally understood the complicated feelings in the hearts of these two fellows. If it was him, facing such a situation, he would also inevitably feel conflicted. Then do you hate young Master Yun? If I say that I don't hate at all, then I'm just fooling myself. There must be a little bit. Sai, as long as I think about how I've fallen into someone's scheme, how I've been trapped for my entire life, how I've fought until the very end, and how I've died, and how I've had to thank the instigator for his kindness and leave with 1,000 thanks, my heart, I had wanted to get rid of the former crown prince, the mediocre king. Who would have thought that I would be a step too late? To think that the former crown prince has already been slaughtered. Hen Bieli heaved a long sigh. Actually, when we saw this fellow die, we suddenly felt an emptiness in our hearts. We didn't know what to do in the future. That's why we were so resolute. That's what he said, Hong Zhan said from the side. The spirits are stirring. We're here. Xidigarba's eyes flashed. Everyone stopped in their tracks. They looked at the spacious hall in front of them, at the endless ghastly fog that gushed out of it. Concourse of the underworld's positions are tentatively set at 15. Xidigarba sucked in a deep breath, thinking of the many positions in the concourse of the underworld's legacy. He could not help murmuring in his heart, there's still a long way to go. It was the same day that Wang Yunzhu had led the 400,000-strong army into the Empire of Zio's territory. Millions of miles of land and rivers were in full bloom as the flames of war spread. Wherever Yutong's western army passed, they were invincible. There was no contest. They were undefeatable and undefeatable. However, Wang Yunzhu, the marshal who guarded the western front and had fought against the Empire of Zio for more than a decade, was utterly confused. Why is the Empire of Zio's combat power so weak? Marshal Wang scratched his head from a high point on his horse, looking perplexed. Then where did Zio's army that fought me and made me cry out in agony go to? Am I dreaming, or is Zio's army suffering from somnambulism? Why do I remember that Zio has quite a number of experienced marshals? Where have they gone? This is a war that will annihilate a nation, a true annihilation of its people. Are they really not coming? Perhaps your father has been scaring himself all these years, thinking that the other party is a tiger but they're all king paper tigers? It was a pity that no one could answer Wang Yunzhu's questions. In fact, the generals around him were filled with doubt, confusion, and even awkwardness. It was understandable that they were puzzled. After all, even the marshal was behaving like this, how could his subordinates be spared? What was the awkwardness about? This was a battle that Yutong had publicly acknowledged as a war that would annihilate a nation. It concerned Yutong's peace and Tianquan's prosperity for years to come. The Western Front's 400,000-strong army was full of vigor, but they were mostly cautious, afraid that they would fall into the enemy's trap if they were careless. After all, the Western Front had fought with Zio for years and knew Zio's army well. It was one thing to think that they would win, but it was another to be cautious. However, when both sides engaged in battle, Zio's army either crumbled at the first contact or surrendered right away. The defeated army was like a landslide. The sincerity of their surrender was so obvious that it made one feel suspicious. The Western Front's vanguard general, Sun Zihu, quickly came to a conclusion. This was a trap. Although the battle was going smoothly, Sun Zihu did not dare to advance too recklessly. They had already won a great victory, but they still sent out countless scouts every day, afraid that they would fall into Zio's trap. It was only after Wang Yunzhu's arrival that he came to a conclusion after analyzing the previous battles and the current information. Zio's army was not faking their defeat, nor was it arrogant, nor was it a ploy. They had truly been defeated, a complete and utter defeat. Strictly speaking, Sun Zihu's cautiousness and hesitation had actually delayed the military's plans, giving the Empire of Zio a few more days of breathing space. In spite of this, Wang Yunzhu had to admit that Sun Zihu could not be blamed for this. If this had happened to him or any other famous general in this world, they would not have dared advance recklessly without exception. It was because of this mentality that the current situation was awkward. Then the core question arose. Everyone had really fought Zio for so many years. How could Zio have suddenly become so weak? If Heaven's Inquisition was here, he would tell you that if luck was not on your side, you would not even be able to get a mouthful of cold water. Now that the empire of Zio's destiny was gone, of course, everything would be a mess. Disasters, natural and man-made, would befall them all at once. What was there to be afraid of? The truth was more or less as well. The empire of Zio's veteran marshals who were used to war were either embroiled in a coup and could not even fend for themselves, or they had been killed, imprisoned, or dismissed from their posts. It was extremely rare to meet someone who could fight on the battlefield now. Take Sun Zihu's aggressive first battle into the empire of Zio as an example. Both sides faced each other from afar. Sun Zihu did not dare to be careless, lining up in formation. Just as he was about to launch his attack, the enemy had fallen into disarray. Sun Zihu was someone who knew the art of war. How could he not seize the opportunity to attack? The truth was simple. There had been an internal conflict in the enemy's troop. The enemy's vanguard general had been intimidated by Sun Zihu's army and had fled with his troops. The vanguard general had fled at the last moment? How ridiculous was this? However, it had happened right in front of the two armies. When the two armies were facing off against each other, their own vanguard had fled out of fear. This was a fatal blow to Zio's army's morale. In addition to Sun Zihu's attack, how could Zio's army not be defeated by the two chests, one inside and one outside? Of course, it was a crushing defeat. However, such a victory had come too easily. Sun Zihu dared not advance rashly, listening for information here and there. It was only when Wang Yunzhu's main force had arrived that he was certain of the situation. However, the situation was completely out of control. On the battlefield, the increasingly absurd battles were happening one after another. 100 to 200 Yutang soldiers were chasing thousands of Zio soldiers like they were chasing rabbits. 10 people were daring enough to attack a 500-man army and they could even win. 3 to 5 soldiers were escorting hundreds of Zio's captives from afar. Tell me, who can I reason with? Bastards, their entire families are bastards. Marshal Wang Yunzhu attributed all his frustrations to these 3 words. How can there be any merit to speak of in this situation? Conquering more than half of the empire in less than 3 months. Damn it, if this battle report were to be sent back, would the military believe it? It's fine if they don't believe it, but if they do, they'll scold me to death. F***CKU Wang Yunzhu, have you been eating sh*T in the West all these years? Facing such an opponent, you're still complaining every day. Your father's reputation has been ruined by these bastards from the empire of Zio? Faced with such a situation, the Western generals shared the same frustration as their marshal. Being oppressed by such an opponent for so many years, how useless they were in the eyes of others. Chapter 778. No matter what, the reports of victory were coming one after another to Tiantang City. His Majesty stood in the royal study, his arms behind his back as he stood before his eldest son's portrait, his expression bitter. He's gone. Whatever grudge you all had, it should have been resolved by now, right? He whispered softly to his eldest son. Yes, I know, I've always known. But I've never dealt with it. You all are my children. I thought I could strip him of everything: status, glory, pride, and even dignity. I would be able to spare his life, but, in the end, I didn't. Just like how I couldn't save you. I shouldn't compare myself like this, right? Now that things have come to this, what he owes you has been repaid by your own people. My heart is filled with bitterness. But now, I feel that my heart is finally calmer when I face you again. Because what should have been yours has all been given to your son. Now that the nation is at peace and the people are loyal to us, the empire of Zio in the west is about to be annexed by Yutang. My son, if only you could see all of this, if only you could take over everything personally. Your Majesty. It was Qiu Jianhan who had barged in hurriedly. His voice could be heard even before he arrived. Following his loud bellow, the periphery of the palace was plunged into a pin-drop silence. Old Marshal. Eunuch Li, the head of the palace, chased after him with all his might. Old Marshal, please stay. Allow this old servant to report to His Majesty and await your summons. However, Qiu Jianhan had already barged in with large strides, his forehead drenched in sweat. What happened? His Majesty, dressed in a bright yellow robe, was already standing at the door of the royal study. looking at Qiu Jianhan who had rushed in, his heart thumping wildly. He was not angry, nor would he be. Qiu Jianhan had always done things with a sense of propriety. Since he had lost his composure and acted like he was in a dire situation, even disregarding his status as an official and barging into the palace, something serious must have happened. This was something that even Qiu Jianhan could not deal with. Thinking about it, His Majesty felt dizzy, his heart beating like a drum, his mouth parched. The last time Qiu Jianhan had lost his composure like this was when the 9 Supremes had fallen. What was it now? The things that Qiu Jianhan could not solve or deal with were usually things that he could not solve himself. What the hell is going on? Mr. Qiu, please slow down for now. Urgent matters must be dealt with. His Majesty asked anxiously, not forgetting to comfort Qiu Jianhan. Of course, this was more to ease the tense atmosphere. 9 Supremes. Supreme Cloud. Qiu Jianhan panted heavily, his forehead drenched in sweat. His vision was a little blurry. His Majesty's heart skipped a beat, almost fainting. He grabbed Qiu Jianhan's hand and asked, "What's wrong with Supreme Cloud?" He could not care less about the internal turmoil anymore. This was related to the 9 Supremes and Supreme Cloud. It was a grave matter that could easily shake the foundation of the nation. Yun after the matter after another. Yun had the Qi Majesty. Yun, Qi Emperor had by the other day, the other the Emperor, then the other the another, Yun after another, the by the other hand was Yun. Majesty's sled. Ben. Emperor. Bod. The Yun was Yun Yang. Qiu Jianhan stared at the Emperor. King Xiaoyao's son Yun Yang? How could it be him? This. It really is him. We have always had our suspicions, but we have never thought of really finding out who he is. How could he suddenly be exposed? Qiu Jianhan wiped his sweat away. Now the entire Tiantang city knows. Qiu Jianhan wiped his sweat. Now the entire Tiantang city knows. Who found out about this? The Emperor walked out. Qiu Jianhan followed behind him, shouting, "Guards, guards." Then he followed the Emperor out, wiping his sweat. It's a mess out there now. Your Majesty, be careful. Don't let anything happen to you at this critical juncture. Along the way, the Emperor of Yutong looked around and realized that the people in the palace seemed to be quiet, but there was a hint of frenzy in their expressions. There was also great shock as well as an indescribable excitement and admiration. Of course, most of it was a fanaticism of finally seeing a god. Whispers could be heard from afar. Supreme Cloud is Yun Yang, young Master Yun. Oh my God! Lord Supreme Cloud has been by our side all along. It's been so many years. Lord Supreme Cloud has finally shown himself. We finally know who Lord Supreme Cloud is. Our wish has been fulfilled, but I'd rather not know. Lord Supreme Cloud deserves our gratitude and admiration, but now that his identity has been exposed, the danger he'll have to face will increase 10-fold or even 100-fold. That's right. What do these people mean by making a ruckus? Why did they suddenly reveal Lord Supreme Cloud's identity? Do they have ulterior motives, or is there another conspiracy? I don't know, but it's not as simple as it seems. It's no longer important to think about the source now. The situation now is a mess, a complete mess. Yes, it was a mess, a complete mess. This was His Majesty's most intuitive thought. Time went back to a day ago. A dozen people had suddenly appeared at the original location of the residence of 9 Supremes. One of them took out a strange object and looked around. Then they found the residence of King Yun. At that time, Yun Yang was searching for the location of the haunting temple with the concourse of the underworld and did not encounter this group of people. In spite of this, the rumor that Yun Yang was Supreme Cloud appeared at this moment and spread like wildfire. When the 9 Supremes are formed, the world is stable. When the 9 Supremes are united, the world is about to be stabilized. It's only now that we find out that the famous Supreme Cloud is actually Yun Yang of the residence of King Xiaoyao. Young Master Yun, once the #1 popinjay in Tiantang City. Is this an accident or is this within reason? There's naturally evidence to support the claim that Yun Yang is Supreme Cloud. Firstly, the heavenly mystery strategy in our hands will never be wrong. Although this is a secret technique of the school and not enough to convince everyone, there are other pieces of evidence that can be found everywhere after a detailed analysis. It's just that not many people have linked it to them in the past. Yun Yang doesn't appear every time Supreme Cloud goes on a mission. Every time young Master Yun appears, Supreme Cloud's mission must have ended. For example, since the formation of the 9 Supremes until now, every mission that the 9 Supremes carried out was dug out for comparison. The time was accurate to every hour of every day. One by one they were compared. After the Nine Supremes incident at Tianshan Cliff, young Master Yun didn't appear for almost half a year. Then where did this young Master Yun go? He must be recuperating. The incident at Tianshan Cliff permanently buried the remaining 8 of the 9 Supremes. Although Supreme Cloud was the only survivor, it's impossible that he wasn't injured. Then there's other evidence, which is, with these pieces of evidence listed, the matter of Yun Yang being Supreme Cloud was almost concluded. During this period of time, the legend of the School of Kismet State had abruptly spread like wildfire and was widely known throughout the world. By the will of heaven we search for the true dragon, who belongs to the world. The Kismet State is in our hearts. Serve the world and the people, merit will last for 1,000 years. Emerge in troubled times, hide in order to save the world. When the world is not peaceful, the school gate will open. Chapter 779. Following the rapid spread of these legends, many people found many ancient books and records to prove that the legend of the School of Kismet State was not just a rumor. For a moment, the entire continent was hit with a sudden realization. So this was the truth. So, there really was a celestial being who could save the world in this world. It turned out that throughout the ages, the wise rulers and overlords of these continents were all chosen by the people of the School of Kismet State from the vast sea of people. It turned out that these people were the ones who truly cared about the world. Every time they appeared, it was not to fight for power or personal desires, but to calm the chaotic world. They were all trying to save the people from the disaster, to solve the problem of the world's fate. Their merit was boundless. The merit of choosing a wise ruler time and time again to calm the chaotic world could not be faked. After so many years, was this not respectable enough? If one did not respect such people, what else could one do? As for them becoming kings and ancestors in the end, they had given so much, so what if they received a little reward? It would be the best for the world to have such a caring person rule the world. Moreover, the School of Kismet State had gone into seclusion immediately after they had chosen a wise ruler, not claiming any credit. This was also the reason why not many people in the continent had heard of their names. How noble they were. Yutong's rulers gritted their teeth in anger at such remarks. We have worked so hard, millions of warriors have shed their blood on the battlefield, countless civil and military officials have racked their brains. Generations of people have worked tirelessly to achieve the great situation where we are about to unify the world today. Stand up and flip your lips and all the credit will belong to you. You are the source, the initiators of everything. How could there be such logic in this world? This was the so-called fallacy of misleading the masses. For a time, Tiantang City was filled with countless ancient books. Many of the rare books that had only been passed down in legends were revealed to the world. Countless scholars began to write books and write biographies of the School of Kismet State based on the bits and pieces of the books, extolling the praises of the School of Kismet State. The legend of Supreme Cloud, his identity, and the legend of the School of Kismet State were intertwined. The ancient legend and the current myth complemented each other, shocking the people. To the Emperor of Yutong, these series of changes were like all sorts of ghosts and monsters leaping out at the same time that the world was about to witness the coming of great rule. Each and every one of them was unusually lively. Even with the intervention of the officials and the Emperor of Yutong's direct statement that he did not care, the popularity did not subside. Instead, it grew more intense and unstoppable. With the sudden turn of events, the front of the residence of King Yun became even more crowded. Countless people rushed over to kowtow, and many even knelt there and refused to leave. Countless people knelt down with every step as if they were on a pilgrimage, and they knelt all the way here from afar. Lord Supreme Cloud. Young Master Yun Yang is Lord Supreme Cloud. No wonder young Master Yun is so handsome. So he's Lord Supreme Cloud himself. Lord Supreme Cloud is our savior. We must come here and kowtow in gratitude. Otherwise we would be ungrateful. Under the guidance of such thoughts, people from all over the Empire of Yutong began to gather in Tiantang City. Lord Supreme Cloud does not care about our repayment, but we have received his grace. Even if we are not fated to meet again, we must come and kowtow and take a look at Lord Supreme Cloud's home from afar. Such a view had always existed in the hearts of every Yutong citizen. In the past, they had only tried their best to restrain themselves because they did not know Supreme Cloud's true identity, to prevent any possibility of his identity being exposed. Now that Yutong was about to conquer Tianxian, this concern was greatly reduced. Now that it was triggered by someone with ulterior motives, it formed a tsunami of people. Although the residence of Yun was filled with experts, it was useless no matter how skilled they were when faced with such a situation. We don't have to see Lord Supreme Cloud. As long as we can kowtow to his door, that's good enough. Even if it's just to see the place where Lord Supreme Cloud used to live, it would be a blessing of a lifetime. There would be no more regrets. Yun Xiaoyao could only open the gates of the residence of Yun completely and tidy up Yun Yang's yard for people to visit. This move spread quickly and caused a sensation throughout the country. The number of people who entered the residence of Yun to visit each day exceeded 300,000. In addition, the number of visitors was increasing every day. This kind of situation was really too frightening. The pillows and blankets in Yun Yang's bedroom had turned completely black in just 2 to 3 days. Everyone wanted to touch the pillows and blankets that Lord Supreme Cloud had slept on. Although there were strict prohibitions from the supervisors, there were still those who were bold enough to try and fulfill their wishes even if it meant risking their lives. Faced with such a situation, everyone was helpless. After all, they could only stop them verbally. How could they actually stop them with force? His Majesty the Emperor was hopping mad at the situation, but he could do nothing about it. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that someone with ulterior motives was making use of Supreme Cloud's name and prestige, using the nation's reverence towards the 9 Supreme Lords to create a commotion. There must be a sinister motive hidden in the depths of his heart. However, faced with the popular sentiment, there was nothing that could be done. The Emperor Yun Xiaoyao, Qiu Jianhan, Fang Qingtian, and the rest of the empire's higher-ups were all anxious and restless. They were at their wits' end, unable to do anything about it. They knew that the enemy in the dark had ulterior motives and that the conspiracy was growing, but they could not interfere and could only let it happen. They knew that the consequences would be unimaginable if this continued, but they could not stop it. How could such a mood not be gloomy? Indifferently, there were still 2 people who were excited about the situation and even felt proud of it, Ji Lingxi and Shengguan Lingxiu. With the girls' intelligence, they knew that someone was behind this, but their beloved's reputation in the Empire of Yutong could not be faked. How could the 2 ladies not be emotional? It was especially so for Ji Lingxi, who was Supreme Win's younger sister. Seeing the 9 Supremes' prestige in the Empire of Yutong, seeing the people of Yutong rushing over with tears in their eyes and prostrating themselves to the ground in worship, the agitation she felt had almost caused her heart to explode. This was what my brother had done. This was what Yin Yang had done. They were such great people. They were worthy of everyone's reverence, admiration, and worship. They were also worthy of any good girl's heart, worthy of any precious thing in this world. This is my sweetheart. I want to know where Supreme Cloud has gone now. Immediately. Immediately. In the palace, the emperor's face was dark. Opposite him was a dumbfounded Yun Xiaoyao. His Majesty looked at his younger brother of a different mother with a murderous expression, his knuckles cracking as he clenched his fists. He had the urge to beat someone up. Recalling the time when he had discussed Supreme Cloud's identity, Yun Yang, and everything else with him, Yun Xiaoyao's solemn promise was still ringing in his ears. He was not Supreme Cloud. Your younger brother can guarantee it. Your younger brother can guarantee it with so and so, but now, the emperor gritted his teeth. Looking at his stance, His Majesty could devour Yun Xiaoyao bite by bite without doing anything. Cough cough cough. Chapter 780. Where had Supreme Cloud gone? This was His Majesty's question. Although he was angry and they were in an extremely private place like the royal study, His Majesty no longer dared to call Yun Yang this brat, that little bastard, or that little bastard when he mentioned Yun Yang. He had to address him respectfully as Supreme Cloud. This was the respect that he had earned through his meritorious deeds. Even His Majesty was no exception. The Emperor of Yutong was Yutong's top man, but Supreme Cloud was a legend of this world. This was the difference between a man and a god. Thinking about it, His Majesty's gaze towards Yun Xiaoyao grew even more ferocious, as if he was looking at the enemy who had killed his father. The empire is in such turmoil now, why is he hiding at home? He informed me 2 days ago and went to the front line of the western border. Yun Xiaoyao shrunk his neck and shrunk his body into the chair obediently. He tried his best to shrink, to reduce his presence in front of his royal brother. Even if the Emperor of Yutong's cultivation base was shallow and he might not be able to withstand a single breath from Yun Xiaoyao, the coercion of a superior and most importantly, his elder brother's authority made King Yun shudder like a cicada in winter. Oh, he's gone to the front line. Sigh, Lord Supreme Cloud is truly dedicated to the nation and the people, always charging to the front line? Qiu Jianhan coughed, trying his best to ease the tense atmosphere. Yes. Leng Daoyin and Fang Qingtian agreed dryly. Under normal circumstances, or rather, under most circumstances, When three of the capital's top rogues joined hands to smooth things over, especially when the person involved was the Emperor of Yutong's most precious younger brother, the matter should have been resolved into nothing. Even the process of the punishment being lifted high and lowered lightly would have been omitted. However, this time it was obviously an exception to most circumstances. His Majesty did not speak or move. His posture and actions did not change in the slightest. He remained seated on the throne like a raging lion, his eyes fixed on Yun Xiaoyao with deep hatred. Yun Xiaoyao was, of course, uncomfortable. It was not that he did not try to turn his head to avoid eye contact, but the prickling sensation was worse than direct eye contact. He could not help turning his head back, only to meet the Emperor's cold, gleaming eyes. Just as he was about to speak, he felt an inexplicable chill in his heart. Forcing himself to remain calm, he asked, Why are you looking at me like that? Why is he looking at you like that? Why are you still asking? You still have the cheek to ask? His Majesty gritted his teeth, and his voice came out from between his teeth. He said coldly, the reason is simple. It's because you're handsome and I like you. Every word of this sentence was teasing. In this kind of context and atmosphere, it was exceptionally creepy and made one's hair stand on end. Yun Xiaoyao chuckled dryly and coughed. He laughed dryly and said, You flatter me, royal brother. This humble brother's only face is passable. The Emperor gritted his teeth and said with a twisted expression, You're flattering me. Other than this face, you still have one thing that you're most proud of. You've raised a good son who has saved the entire empire of Yutong. The conversation took a sudden turn, turning into a hostile atmosphere. All in all, it was extremely out of place. Qiu Jianhan, Leng Daoyin, and Fang Qingtian shrank back into their chairs tactfully and did not move, trying their best to reduce their presence. They watched the confrontation between the two brothers innocently. If it's possible, this old man doesn't even want to listen to it. I'll retire and return to my hometown to enjoy the rest of my life. You can't blame me for being cowardly. This is a place of trouble, too dangerous. Yun Xiaoyao felt like he was sitting on pins and needles. He chuckled dryly and said, Isn't that your nephew? Just a little bit of credit, it's not worth mentioning. I've done far from enough. Royal brother, you're flattering me. His Majesty did not even have the slightest hint of a smile on his face. He said coldly, How is this flattering? You've done so much, yet it's still far from enough. It's obvious that there's too much to mention. I'll only ask you this. A few days ago I asked you if you knew who Supreme Cloud was. How did you answer me? Yun Xiaoyao hummed and lowered his head. He was speechless for a long time. Raise your head. His Majesty shouted like a thunderclap. His voice shook the entire imperial study room for a moment. The four of them lifted their heads in unison. Then Qiu Jianhan and the other two lowered their heads again. Cough, I didn't hear you. Yun Xiaoyao was sweating profusely. Royal brother, what do you mean by this and that? The king was furious. Have I asked you 800 times about this? Is your son Yin Yang Supreme Cloud? You promised me, you confided in me, you promised me again and again, you even swore in our father's name. He took a few deep breaths and slammed the table. But today it seems like you're not surprised at all. Yun Xiaoyao quickly put on a dumbfounded expression and said, At that time you really don't know what's good for you? His Majesty interrupted Yun Xiaoyao's quibble and spat at him. How dare you? Do you think that because your cultivation base is high and you have a good son, you don't care about me, your elder brother, anymore? Do you think that you can do whatever you want to do to me and fool me however you want? Yun Xiaoyao's hands trembled. Royal brother, listen to my explanation. I can explain. There's a reason for all this, a coincidence. Explain your ass. I'll listen to your King explanation. His Majesty cut him off right away, his roar echoing throughout the palace. Yun Xiaoyao. You disobedient, unfilial thing, you treacherous, deceiving thing, you. Suddenly he roared, Who allowed you to sit down? Stand up. You bastard, you old bastard. You've become King demon all these years. Yun Xiaoyao raised his head and argued, You can scold me, who asked you to be my blood brother. But you can't scold our father. You can't even call me a bastard or a bastard. Think about it yourself. I miss your father, my asteriskis. I miss your son, my asteriskis. His Majesty was infuriated and spoke without thinking. Shut up. You don't have the right to speak in front of me. But you really can't scold my father. Scolding my father is scolding your father. Why, you're the ruler of the world, you're the only one in the world. You can't speak like this. Yun Xiaoyao's aura grew weaker and weaker. Finally he squatted on the chair with his neck hunched. His Majesty was getting angrier and angrier. He had already stood up and walked over step by step, looking down at Yun Xiaoyao like a majestic lion. He pointed his finger at his forehead and scolded. Each time he scolded, he pointed his finger and Yun Xiaoyao would tilt his head back. With another scolding, he pointed his finger again and Yun Xiaoyao would tilt his head back. In the end, it was obvious that the finger pointing was not enough to satisfy His Majesty's tyrannical heart. He kicked King Xiaoyao twice, turning him into a rolling gourd on the ground. Your Majesty, please calm down. Cuff, please calm down. Qiu Jianhan saw Yun Xiaoyao's helpless pleading gaze and came forward to mediate. However, once he spoke, old Marshal Qiu knew that he had fallen into a trap. Chapter 781. As expected, His Majesty's gaze shifted to Qiu Jianhan as soon as he was told to calm down. His rage grew. Oh ho 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 ho. I was wondering who was so bold that I couldn't even vent my anger in front of him. So, it's Qiu Jianhan who has been spouting nonsense, deceiving the Emperor and bewitching the Emperor as his duty. Old Marshal Qiu. Minister Qiu. Great War God Qiu. How are you? You're great. I have high hopes for you, remember to keep it up. Qiu Jianhan sat with his head down, exasperated. I remember asking you many times about Supreme Cloud's true identity. Didn't you say you didn't know as well? But you don't seem so surprised now. I say, why do you want to run away once I ask you to investigate? You actually want to go to the Western troop to preside over the war, wanting to hide. I say, why do you want to hide? So, you're hiding from me, from this troublesome place, from this troublesome person. So, all of you know about this but you're hiding it from me, am I right? Ho ho ho. Qiu Jianhan. The Emperor bellowed, do you think I'm an idiot? Qiu Jianhan's cough was stuck in his throat, almost choking to death. I'm an idiot? What can I say? I can say, Your Majesty, you're not an idiot, or Your Majesty, you're wise. That didn't seem right. The more I tried to explain, the worse things would get. So, I decided to shut up and obediently endure this storm. Then, His Majesty's wrath gradually shifted to Fang Qingtian and then to Leng Daoyin. By the time the Emperor was tired of cursing and leaned back on his chair to pant and drink water, the four men's faces and hair were already covered in white spittle. It was the first time in so many years that His Majesty had been so enraged. How could he not be enraged? The Emperor felt as if his internal organs had been blown apart 800 times over. Now, as long as he saw the four men's heads drooping in their cowardly faces, he felt like his heart was going to explode again. He wanted to lash out again and start cursing right here and now. However, his stomach was clearly still full of anger, but now he only felt dizzy. Shockingly, he didn't even have the strength to be angry. He could only pant heavily while glaring fiercely at these guys. His gaze was as sharp as a knife, stabbing at them. If gazes were really blades, then in this short period of time, the four of them would have been sliced 700 to 800 times. Cough cough cough. Fang Qingtian cleared his throat and was about to speak. Old fart, why are you coughing? You have tuberculosis. In the past, when you were like this, I had to give you a lot of face. I wouldn't say anything. But now. The Emperor narrowed his eyes at Fang Qingtian. Who doesn't know how an old fellow like you, who has 1 foot in the coffin and half of your body in the underworld, can still come out to piss me off? So it's because Lord Supreme Cloud is here to extend your life. Oh ho ho, you're so honored. Fang Qingtian was dumbfounded. I coughed a few times to get down to business. How did I end up getting hit in the face with a hot fart? What else do you have to say? Say it, say it. His Majesty, who had lost control of his emotions, was exasperated. You bastards, what kind of person do you think I am? You're hiding something that all of you know from me? Do you think I'm a fatuous emperor who doesn't know what's right and wrong? You want to kill Supreme Cloud the moment you find him? Because he's so meritorious? Are you afraid of me? That's why you're hiding everything from me? What a bunch of bastards. Your Majesty, even if your Majesty is furious, now isn't the time to vent your anger. What's more urgent now is that the situation is so turbulent that it's obviously the doing of someone with ulterior motives. What we should be thinking about now is what we should do about this matter. How should we react? Fang Qingtian said seriously, this matter must be dealt with as soon as possible. If it's allowed to grow, it could easily shake the nation. The Emperor snorted angrily and said, all of you speak. How should we deal with this? One by one. Qiu Jianhan coughed. He wanted to speak, but when he raised his head, he shrank it back. He used his eyes to look at Yun Xiaoyao, hinting that he should be the one to speak about this matter. You are the victim's father. Who else would be the one to take the blame if not you? Yun Xiaoyao rolled his eyes and shrunk into his chair without making a sound. Meh. How dare I open my mouth now? Didn't you see that I gave you a good beating the moment I opened my mouth? Besides, I don't have any ideas. You want me to think of a solution for this kind of brainstorming matter? You think too highly of me. Lord Yun was feeling extremely aggrieved as well. I'm just an idle prince. That old bastard went out to play around and gave birth to me, but he didn't care. I was conferred the title of Marquis, but he didn't give me any real power. I don't even have a salary, but how many times have I risked my life for the Empire of Yutong all these years? It would be an understatement to say that I survived 100 battles. So what if my son is Supreme Cloud? He has saved the entire empire. Father and son, we have done so much for the Empire of Yutong. Not only do we not get anything in return, we even have to scold us like this. Until now, you fellows still want your father to face the lightning. What kind of logic was this? Even if you beat me to death, I won't come out. Once I come out, I might be beaten to death. You fellows still have some dignity in the eyes of this emperor, but I don't even have the slightest bit of dignity in front of him. If he wanted to hit me, he would hit me, and if he wanted to scold me, he would scold me. In fact, when he hit me, I had to use all my cultivation to resist him, afraid that I would hurt him. Apart from not being able to kill me, he could do whatever he wanted to me. Moreover, it was perfectly justified, and he called it family law. What the F***ck. Lung Daoyin was the least suspicious one. Firstly, he had less contact with Yun Yang, and secondly, he had not received any treatment from Yun Yang. He coughed and wiped the saliva off his face, saying, Old Feng is right. Someone is obviously behind this with ulterior motives. I reckon that it's most likely the people from the so-called school of Kismet State. Why don't we focus our detection efforts on them? Do I need you to tell me that? What you're saying is nonsense. The emperor rolled his eyes and said angrily, the problem is, it's already been turned into a god-making movement. Don't you know that the law doesn't punish the masses? Everyone was silent. What he said hit the nail on the head. This was the reality, a god-making movement. Using Supreme Cloud's influence to stir up a frenzy, the entire school of Kismet State would be pushed out. With this momentum, the world's scholars would be mobilized to push the school of Kismet State to the altar. They were smart. There was only one person in the Empire of Yutong who could be made a god. Chapter 782. No matter how powerful and influential the school of Kismet State was, it was still a far cry from Supreme Cloud. The method that could be used on other emperors in history was completely inapplicable to the Empire of Yutong. Therefore they could only borrow the momentum. Now that his identity had been exposed and his enemy was the top sect of the continent, the Four Seasons Tower, he would not be able to live for long. The school of Kismet State could even carry out a deeper level of operations from within the school of Kismet State. His identity had been exposed and his enemy was the continent's top sect, the Four Seasons Tower. As long as Supreme Cloud died, the benefits of this massive deification movement that affected the entire world would all belong to the school of Kismet State. Even the Yutong royalty would not be able to gain much from it. At most, they would only be able to get some scraps. Why would they not do something like this? The timing right now was a godsend opportunity. Yutong's momentum was already established. Now that the military generals were expanding their territories and establishing meritorious deeds, the civil officials and scholars would not be of much use at such a time. It was the achievement of unifying Tianxian. How regretful would it be if they could not get a share of it? Those with official positions would be better, but what about the scholars without official positions? Easy. I'll give you a reason. You just have to start preaching. As long as you preach well and properly, you'll naturally be credited. When the world is unified in the future, you'll all be the meritorious officials. This is because you've made a great contribution in the War of Unification. Furthermore, the school of Kismet State has the merit of educating the people of the world. The momentum has already been established and it is almost unshakable. It had to be said that this kind of fallacious reasoning and devious tricks that schemed against the hearts of many scholars were impressively very popular. Yes, I'm writing a biography for Supreme Cloud and the school of Kismet State today. As long as the country is unified in the future, my reputation will naturally spread. At that time, no matter where he went, he would have a solid set of qualifications that could not be faked. There was no need to fight or work. All I had to do was move my lips and pen. There was no danger at all. All I had to do was write a biography and flatter someone. What an easy job. It was much easier than those fools who went to the battlefield with their heads in their hands, was it not? Besides, when I became an official in the future, I would be much better than those crude people who only knew how to swear and kill people. This was clearly a good thing with no capital but great profits. Facing such a good thing, wouldn't these scholars flock to it like ducks? What? You're saying what we're doing is wrong. Let me ask you, is Supreme Cloud our nation's hero? What's wrong with me writing a biography for him? Committed a crime? Shouldn't I do something for Lord Supreme Cloud? What do you mean by that? You want to rebel? That's right, those who opposed it were really a big hat that could be casually pinned on them, and they would be consigned to eternal damnation. It had to be said that the school of Kismet State's move was indeed a masterful move. He had captured the mentality of Yutong's people. You are loyal, you are grateful, I will use your gratitude and your loyalty. You are despicable, you are opportunistic, I will use your despicable and opportunistic. The bright spots and deep-rooted bad habits of human nature were all accounted for. This wave is coming at us ferociously and the repercussions are endless. It's not easy to deal with. Qiu Jianhan sighed. Everything else is still manageable, but the key is that they've tied themselves to Supreme Cloud and even the 9 Supremes' names. As the saying goes, pull one hair and the whole body will be affected. Even if we can take any measures, the effect will be minimal under this premise. There's almost no good countermeasure. Hearing Qiu Jianhan's words, His Majesty was even more annoyed. How could he not know this? He also knew the crux of the matter and the severity of it. He hoped that Qiu Jianhan and the others could come up with a solution. Whoever wanted to hear the root of the matter was no longer important. His gaze darted back and forth across the faces of the 4 big shots like flying daggers. Finally he sighed and said, Usually, there's a limit to the destructiveness of public opinion. As long as the officials step in, it's not difficult to quell the discussion as soon as possible. However, this time there's someone manipulating it and the impact is too wide. It's a fact that the law doesn't punish the masses, and this masses still have a chance to do something great. The human heart has always been easily swayed, it's difficult to have a long-term view of the big picture and sense of crisis. Yun Xiaoyao and the others frowned and nodded in agreement to this point. The ripple caused by this incident was undoubtedly serious. The aftermath was even more significant, but as His Majesty had said, as long as the mastermind behind the scenes could be dealt with, it would be easy to deal with. The problem then shifted to the school of Kismet State. The school of Kismet State did not have many headmasters, but how many people could there be in a school that was secluded from the world? In spite of this, since it was a secluded school, the abilities of its members were by no means mediocre. The depth of their cultivation base was foreseeable. If they were to completely oppose each other, it was foreseeable that they would bring great harm to the empire of Yutong's higher-ups with their formidable martial prowess. What was more, Yutong would not have the ability to stop them at all. Fang Qingtian rubbed his brows. This incident has come too abruptly. We're already unusually passive and unprepared. I wonder what the real purpose of the school of Kismet State's sudden appearance is. The thoughts of these people from the hidden sects are unreasonable to begin with. They've been well behaved for so many years in the past. Why would they suddenly appear at this critical juncture? Yun Xiaoyao could not understand this. Actually, the school of Kismet State has come to me before, the emperor chuckled humorlessly. Speaking of this, perhaps it's really fate's arrangement. Actually, the school of Kismet State's people didn't want to do this, to go to such extremes, but reality forced them to do so. Putting aside their standpoint, I can even understand their choice and their way of doing things. They don't feel too good about it. They might not be any more relaxed than our helplessness. What do you mean? Yun Xiaoyao asked in surprise. The emperor shut his mouth right away and glared at Yun Xiaoyao, not saying another word. Everyone felt a slight chill run down their spines. His Majesty had already opened his mouth and was about to reveal everything he knew, but Yun Xiaoyao's question, which was clearly just a formality to connect the dots, had stopped in a fit of pique. I can say it to others, but I won't say it if you ask. There was a moment of awkward silence. After a long silence, Yun Xiaoyao looked at the emperor in a daze and said carefully, "Royal brother?" The emperor bared his teeth and said as if he was about to devour someone, "Your son is so amazing, a living legend. You can go ask your son, why do you need to ask me? Wasn't it already done? Why was it back?" Yun Xiaoyao was even more bewildered, standing there for a long time. Ha! Qiu Jianhan and the others could no longer hold it in. Even when they were discussing such a serious topic and in front of the emperor, they could not help bursting into laughter. It had to be said that the atmosphere between the 2 brothers of the royal family was really amusing. Especially for the emperor, who was so talented and bold that he could swallow the world, to be so aggressive, it made people's eyes light up. No, it was a rare sight to see. What do you mean, Your Majesty? Qiu Jianhan asked hurriedly as he trembled with laughter, trying his best to control himself. Humph. After venting his anger, the emperor said in a low voice, the school of Kismet State's original intention was to support Dongxian. Including Dongxuan's invasion of the Fortress of Resilience, it was part of their plan. Everyone present was smart enough to understand the situation at once. However, they didn't expect that Dongxian could still be defeated in the end, despite having such a huge advantage. A mocking smile hung on His Majesty's face as he said, so, they can only change their target now. The group understood it all at once. Going against their original intention, and abandoning their stance. If I were from the school of Kismet State, I would be embarrassed as well. The school of Kismet State has always locked on to its target from the inside out and hit it with a single strike. There has never been an exception since the beginning of time. This has also established the positivity of their identity in the annals of history. This time, however, due to the change in the situation, they could only choose to go from the outside and passively, using public opinion to force us to acknowledge their position. Only then could they continue to benefit. Of course, another reason is that we don't acknowledge their position. His Majesty said, that's why there's this commotion. It's just that the timing they've chosen to start the commotion is too perfect. It's perfect, absolutely perfect. Fang Qingtian said, that's right. If they'd started it earlier, we could have just ignored it and the rumors would have dissipated. If they'd started it later, the continent's situation would have been settled. Whether Supreme Cloud's identity and background would have been exposed, and the school of Kismet State's choice would have been irrelevant. It just so happened that Yutong had just risen and started the final battle to pacify Tianxian. Even though the conquest of Ziyou has become a foregone conclusion, it has yet to be completed. The timing is impeccable. Let's stop flattering those shameless fellows. How should we deal with them next? This is the real headache. Let's think of a solution quickly. Yun Xiaoyao exhaled deeply and said, from what I see, the most despicable ones now are the scholars who take advantage of the situation and add fuel to the fire. Scholars are not good people. Most righteous people are like dogs, but most heartless people are scholars. These words are the best. Fang Qingtian's attitude was more fair as he said, I'm afraid King Yun's words are a little biased. There are still many scholars in Yutong who have a strong moral character. There are many civil officials in the imperial court who serve the public, the nation, and the people wholeheartedly. Those who are stirring up trouble and adding fuel to the fire are just scum. These people want to use this opportunity to gain fame and embark on an official career. They even hope to leave their names in the annals of history. What filthy thoughts they have, Lung Daoyin said, it's also the best time for them to take advantage of this. If this is something that the school of Kismet State has long planned, or even something that they've planned and grasped perfectly, then the school of Kismet State's scheme is truly remarkable. I'm afraid that we martial artists really can't give any better suggestions on this matter. Qiu Jianhan said, Your Majesty, why don't you summon the Chancellor, the Grand Tutor, and the others and see what they have to say? Fang Qingtian and Lung Daoyin chuckled. This old man was still as cunning as ever. Using scholars to deal with scholars? Let's write one chapter today. Depressing the plot design is wrong. I'm having a headache. I've planned to have a decisive battle here. This has been decided a long time ago. Therefore, I've let Sun Luo's men leave and expose Supreme Cloud's identity. However, after thinking about it for 2 days, the more I think about it, the more I feel that it's not right. If I were to have a decisive battle here, some of the holes that I've dug previously would be left unfilled and a part of the plot would be broken. However, since I've already written it and sent it out, it's rather awkward. In other words, these few chapters should only appear about 15 chapters later. Now that I've typed them out so quickly, it's like a child has been born before the due date, and much earlier too. I'm also troubled. Chapter 783. The Grand Tutor and the others are already waiting in the side hall. The Emperor snorted. Summoning the few of you is only to stabilize the military's morale. Such sentiments can be spread among the commoners, but they must never be spread among the military. All of you should understand this. The group rolled their eyes. Of course we understand. It's just that you've come to see us first. I'm afraid it's not because your reason is so honorable. I'm afraid the secretive reason is, you want to vent your anger first to vent your frustrations, don't you? However, from this point of view, the fact that His Majesty wanted to vent his anger before discussing how to deal with this matter, did it not seem to be a big deal? Hurry up and let Supreme Cloud return in secret. His Majesty stood up, his eyes looking at the sky and the ground, but not at Yun Xiaoyao as if he was talking to the air. The Western Front has been set in stone. He has no more use there. Instead, the mess in the capital city is of utmost importance. We need a living legend like him to hold the fort. Yes. Yun Xiaoyao answered from behind. He was the only one who could agree to this. No one else could. His Majesty snorted again and left with a flick of his sleeves. It had to be said that the civil officials really had countless ways to deal with this kind of scheming and deceitful business. At least, His Majesty felt much better when he heard it. This was probably the best explanation of specialization in every field. Your Majesty, we can't act rashly in the current situation. We can try to divide them and split them up in response. How do we divide them and attack them one by one? The school of Kismet states plotting is deep. Now that the situation is set, not only will it be difficult to break it forcefully, but it will also throw us into further disarray. It will be futile. Why don't we pick a few who are currently leading the wave of praise? The higher the reputation, the better. Perhaps we can reward them with official positions. This is what they mean by dividing them. Scholars have always despised each other since ancient times. They don't worry about poverty, but they worry about inequality. Naturally, there will be conflicts among them. These few with vested interests will definitely persuade others to protect their own interests. At the very least, they won't lose what they already have. After all, this is their fundamental purpose. This is the first reason. That makes sense. What's the second reason? The second is to target and suppress a portion of the people on this basis, especially those who are particularly happy. Suppress them mercilessly without turning back, and bring disaster to their families in 9 generations. If we don't do this, we won't be able to make them betray their loved ones and completely calm them down. Then we can use this as a negative example to warn others, and let those who have already accepted the favor of the imperial court feel lucky. Such a contradiction would naturally intensify and become even more difficult to mediate. That makes sense. Thirdly, let those who have already pledged their allegiance be in charge of the follow-up of this matter. How could the imperial court's official position and rewards be given for free? Letting them settle this matter was exactly what they should do, and it was appropriate. I believe that since they have already chosen to betray their original position, they will only be even more ruthless and unscrupulous towards their original position. They will be unscrupulous and resort to every conceivable means. His Majesty's heart skipped a beat. He gave a faint ong and said, The deeper the love, the more hatred. The more kindness, the more resentment. Other than that, deal with those who are in the middle of the uproar as much as possible. There's no need to reward them with great rewards or official positions. We only need to dissuade some of the wavering ones. If necessary, we can come up with another plan to take drastic measures and spread rumors among the people at the bottom. Label such behavior as rebellion. That way, it's inevitable that the uproar on the other side will be divided. There will be advances and retreats in the middle. The crime at the bottom will be too heavy, and the uproar will be greatly reduced. After that, it'll be time for the officials to officially intervene. They'll directly arrest some of the targets with the crime of harming the nation's hero. I think it'll be impossible to lock onto those conspiratorial pawns by then. Even if mistakes are inevitable, they only have themselves to blame. That's right. Lord Supreme Cloud is the nation's hero. For these people to jump out and expose Supreme Cloud's identity is equivalent to placing the hero under the blade of the enemy. This is treason. Their intentions are deserving of death. And then, the civil officials spoke freely. It did not take long for 100 feasible plans to come out. It could be said that if not for the school of Kismet State's instigation behind the scenes, this series of tactics might have vanished into thin air overnight. Even with the school of Kismet State's intervention and instigation and support, the series of punches was enough to make them dizzy and unable to attend to their ends. As His Majesty listened to the officials' discussion, he nodded, but a strange feeling rose in his heart. These tactics were directed at the human heart and nature. They were cunning, vicious, and unscrupulous, but they were the most effective and immediate. If we're talking about the art of killing without spilling blood, these scholars are the ones who have truly reached the pinnacle of perfection. The emperor sat on the throne, narrowing his eyes as he thought to himself. As an emperor, it's not easy to control the hearts of people. Martial men are forthright and straightforward. As long as you master the method and gain their loyalty, you can control them. Scholars, on the other hand, when these thoughts come out of the mouths of the great, bright, and righteous officials, it's so endless. If the martial men harbor rebellious thoughts, perhaps an army can subdue them. But what if the scholars harbor rebellious thoughts? It's been 3 years? His Majesty was cautious. Glancing at the civil officials from the corner of his eyes, he sighed deeply in his heart. All of you are wise and far-sighted, scheming and meticulous. It's a pity that no one has mentioned the most important part after all this planning. Supreme Cloud's identity has been exposed. How can you guarantee the safety of Supreme Cloud and his family? Such a riot can be quelled with a wave of a hand, even if it's only for a moment. However, if Supreme Cloud dies because of this, do you think there'll be a second residence of 9 Supremes in this world? That's the foundation of a nation. If it's just to find firefighters, why would I need to provide you with high positions and generous salaries? It looks like the direction of selecting talents to govern the nation needs to be adjusted. His Majesty's gaze was deep, countless thoughts running through his mind at this very moment. Yun Yang hurried to the western battlefront and witnessed Yutong's army's successive victories with his own eyes. He was immediately relieved and gave up on the idea of showing himself. It was true that if he were to show himself here and even assist them with his manifestation powers, the western battlefront's morale would be even higher, but was this really a good idea? His departure was already a foregone conclusion. Yutong had to gradually get used to not having the 9 Supremes help to turn the tide of the war. This was not a need, it was a necessity. Ling Xiaozue and Dugucho had nothing better to do, so they followed him to watch the battlefield. Chapter 784. How can I be of any help in such a situation? Ling Xiaozue shook his head. This is a one-sided massacre. The Empire of Zio's generals have lost their will to fight, their soldiers have lost their will to fight. They are a dragon without a leader and are in utter chaos. Without a fight, they can destroy their own country, Yun Yang said with a relaxed smile. Since we're already here, why don't we take a look at the situation? The 3 of them circled the Empire of Zio a few times and realized, with relief and helplessness, that there was indeed no need for them to intervene. Yutong's army is the best in the world. Dugucho exclaimed in admiration. This was not a boast, it was old man Dugu's heartfelt words. Yutong's warriors on the battlefield were ferocious, their morale soaring. They did not retreat even when they were outnumbered. They advanced bravely and were unstoppable when they were outnumbered. This is like a bunch of men who've taken aphrodisiac, ravaging each other without fear. Ling Xiaozue was too embarrassed to continue halfway through his sentence. The 3 of them were relieved. They had come with the intention of providing support on the battlefield, but it had turned into a leisurely trip. The contrast was unbearable. It was only on the 4th day, all the soldiers on the battlefield began to whisper to each other. Has anyone seen Lord Supreme Cloud? Has Lord Supreme Cloud appeared on the battlefield? Has Lord Supreme Cloud shown himself? No. I heard that something has happened in the capital city. Lord Supreme Cloud is required to rush back. I've heard about it too. I really don't know what happened. I wonder if it's serious, something that requires Lord Supreme Cloud to deal with? I'm afraid it's not a small matter. Yes, Yun Yang's expression changed at once upon hearing it. He immediately realized that something major must have happened in Tiantang City. Otherwise, Wang Yunzhu would not have dared to spread the news to him in such a manner, no matter how bold he was. He quickly took out the 9 Heavens dictum to check, only to realize that it was filled with messages from Shui Wuyin. Boss, something terrible has happened. Your identity has been exposed. This is the doing of the School of Kismet State. Their current movements are, the capital city is now. There are 2 extremely powerful forces that are trying their best to track down the 9 Heavens dictum. Boss, are you there? Please reply me quickly. Right now, the 9 Heavens dictum is completely dormant and hasn't moved at all. We're waiting for your instructions. Boss, Yun Yang sucked in a deep breath. His expression was already dark, his eyes gleaming with a murderous intent. The School of Kismet State. I didn't put in the effort to look for you. You should have been lucky, but now you actually took the initiative to come to me. Alright, then let's settle old and new debts together. Looking at his darkened expression, Ling Xiaozue asked, what happened? Yun Yang smiled faintly and said, it's nothing. It's just that my hidden identity has been exposed. Ling Xiaozue was stunned and blurted out, Supreme Cloud? Yun Yang shrugged. See, it's nothing. Haven't all of you guessed it already? Ling Xiaozue was speechless. How is this nothing? We guessed it because you've never hidden your peculiarities from us, but to the outside world, your identity has always been the biggest secret in the world. Gu Chaoyang had been nagging about it previously. It was because of this that he could survive under Mr. Nian's hand and escape by sheer luck. Stay put. Yun Yang sent a message to Shui Wuyin. He then stood up. We have to go back. Knowing this, the Four Seasons Tower will definitely make a big move. I think this should be the final battle with the Four Seasons Tower. The final battle. Ling Xiaozui and Dugu Chao's eyes shone. Since we're destined to leave, our grudges should be settled. Yun Yang smiled, his eyes gleaming with boundless murderous intent as he said word by word, the Four Seasons Tower should only be left with a few dozens of people now. Ling Xiaozui and Dugu Chou calculated in their hearts and were suddenly struck with terror. Ever since Supreme Cloud's returned to exact his revenge, the Four Seasons Tower had suffered continuous losses. The periphery was almost completely massacred. Supreme Lord Springfrost's men were first uprooted, then step by step to the 5 venerable lords to the civil and martial ministers. There was also the rumored will of Mr. Nian's doppelganger that was killed some time ago. How many of the Four Seasons Tower's men were left? The Four Seasons Tower's unfathomable depth was never just a rumor. Young Yun, Xia Qiu and Dong's men should still be around, right? Dugu Chou reminded him. While Xia Qiu and Dong's men are still around, they're no longer a threat now. Yin Yang smiled. I've already gotten hold of the name list of these people, their identities, backgrounds. Killing them is as easy as killing chickens. The corners of Ling Xiaozui's lips twitched. Getting hold of the name list. To Yun Yang, these people were like being sentenced to death. There was no chance of escape. With Yun Yang's current cultivation base and capability, he could kill any strong person in this world. The crux of his problem was whether he could know, confirm and find them. That was all. As long as he knew, he would die without a doubt. A gust of wind blew through the night. Despite being thousands of miles away, Yun Yang, whose cultivation base had skyrocketed, had rushed back to Tiantang City at top speed. Looking down from the sky at Tiantang City that had more than a dozen times more people than before, especially at the residence of Yun that was so crowded that even a mouse could not move, Yun Yang's eyes glinted with an unusual cold glint. There were dozens of extremely powerful auras in Tiantang City right now. Every single aura was extraordinarily tyrannical, strong to the point it caused one's hair to stand on end and shiver in fear. It was like there were countless venomous snakes lurking in the shadows, ready to devour anyone at any time. These people are waiting for me to go back and die. Yun Yang chuckled coldly. He was really not worried about these auras. He had never been concerned about the ambush and siege that came openly. What Yun Yang was truly worried about were the hidden enemies who would not even reveal their auras. These people were the ones who could pose a real threat to him. The unknown was the scariest. It was because the unknown was mysterious, because the unknown was unpredictable. Yin Yang was the same. When Supreme Cloud's origin was a mystery, it was difficult for the Four Seasons Tower to eliminate him even when his ability was not very high. Now that his identity had been exposed, the Four Seasons Tower had still chosen the most extreme and direct solution despite Yun Yang having the entire empire of Yutang as his backing. In the eyes of those with ulterior motives, the entire capital city was now filled with the aura of danger. To Yun Yang, Tiantang City was no longer his homeland now, but a trap that had ensnared him. There were lethal traps everywhere. Everyone Yun Yang knew had a few people following and observing them in the dark, trying their best to reduce their presence. From the Emperor to Qiu Jianhan Leng Daoyin Wu Lai, Old Mistress Shangwan Lingxiu Ji Lingxi, Fang Mafei Bai Yishue Xiao Xiaoqing, Yun Xiaoyao, wait a minute. Chapter 785. The School of Kismet State lives up to its 10,000 years of heritage indeed. Their ability to manipulate people's hearts is truly remarkable. All the weaknesses of human nature are in these two short sentences. Yun Yang could not help sighing as he looked at the bustling crowd below him, the citizens who had been encouraged to come and worship the Nine Supremes. Such worship and reverence were supposed to be a great thing for the country, but now that it was being used by the School of Kismet State, it had become an extremely bad thing. Yet, these people were acting in the name of righteousness, preventing the country's machinery from intervening directly. Dealing with these people? Intervening? Not allowing people to come and worship the Nine Supremes? What would that be? If they did so, they would immediately be labeled as being ungrateful. It would be putting away the bow when it had served its purpose, it would be overpowering its master, that would really cause endless turbulence in the future. It might even cause a civil revolt. Yun Yang searched around and soon found news of Bauer. He was in the palace, accompanied by a young girl who looked like she was carved out of jade, carrying a snow-white kitten in her arms, that seemed to be Big Whitey? Brother Bauer, can you teach me how to practice and write? The little girl stared at Bauer with her big, adorable eyes, her gaze filled with admiration. This little brother is amazing. He's only a few years older than me, but he can write, he can read, he can reason, and he even knows martial arts. Wow. This formation is amazing. I admire him so much. Yunyang was shocked to see her. Was this Deputy General Wang Zhuang's youngest daughter, Darling? The little girl was about 5 or 6 years old, looking even cuter than when he first saw her. What's so great about me? My uncle is the best. Bauer said, I learned what I know from my uncle. Your uncle is so awesome. Darling said admiringly, do I know your uncle? Of course you know my uncle. Bauer snorted. It's Lord Supreme Cloud. Nanan's eyes almost bloomed. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and cried out excitedly, ah! Your uncle is Lord Supreme Cloud. I like him the most, worship him the most. However, after thinking for a long time, he couldn't think of any words. In spite of this, Yunyang was rendered speechless for a long time. How did I become an old man? Bauer said proudly, of course, my uncle is the most powerful person in the world. Some distance away, Yun Xiaoyao and His Majesty stood quietly at the side, watching the two children play with smiles on their faces. After the smile, both of their faces were equally heavy. His face was ashen. He was just forcing himself to smile. I've given this little girl a name. Yun Xiaoyao forced a smile and said, Brother, do you want to hear it? To be able to say such words, it was natural that he felt a lot of emotions. It was because the situation in the capital had changed drastically in the past few days. It was too much for one's eyes to take in. According to the civil officials' plan, it was indeed a piece of cake to deal with the scholars who were stirring up trouble outside. As long as they were meritorious, they could settle the matter. However, the entire plan had only just begun when it was suddenly met with the most extreme counterattack. This kind of thing actually happened during the court session. A civil official had just started to report to the court and had just begun. 89 scholars who wrote books and spread propaganda for the school of Kismet State have been apprehended. It was at this moment that a voice suddenly rang out in the Orem Hall. The voice was cold, but it carried an indescribable air of grandeur. Your Majesty, Emperor of Yutong, why are you targeting the school of Kismet State specifically? The voice was like a bell reverberating in the hall. All of a sudden, the expressions of everyone in the imperial court changed. This was Yutong's highest authority. This was the pinnacle of Yutong. There were so many experts and so many officials here, but they had no idea where the enemy was. The other party could actually sneak into the hall without a sound at such a time. What kind of trick was this? Being able to enter this place without a sound? Did that mean that he could kill everyone here without a sound? The civil and military officials were in a frenzy. Everyone looked around, but they could not find the person. Yun Xiaoyao's eyes opened abruptly. He mobilized his deific consciousness with all his might and gathered his lifetime's cultivation base in an attempt to find the hidden person, but it was to no avail as well. He could not help but be shocked. Chapter 786. Yun Xiaoyao was already Yutong's publicly acknowledged, unrivaled expert, the person with the highest cultivation base in the Orem Hall. If even he was at his wit's end, the others' efforts would only be futile. For a moment, they were overwhelmed with helplessness. The calmest person was the Emperor of Yutong himself. He sat on the throne without moving, even maintaining a relaxed state as he said faintly, "Someone from the school of Kismet State? Your Majesty has been kind enough to remember the name of a small rural sect of the martial world. This lowly one is exceptionally honored." The voice said faintly, "I beg your Majesty to retract your order and spare the school of Kismet State." Everyone knew that this was not a plea but a threat, a blatant threat. The other party had infiltrated without a sound and spoken in such a brazen manner. It was obvious that he was using reality to prove one thing. The school of Kismet State could do anything they wanted. Even if they wanted to kill you and all your civil and military officials, it would be as easy as flipping a hand. No one could stop them. The Emperor said faintly, "This matter concerns the nation's foundation. It must be considered carefully." His gaze swept over Yun Xiaoyao briefly. His only hope now was that Yun Xiaoyao could find this person and kill him. If he could not, he could only be threatened, compromised, and forced to submit. The situation was clear now. The lives of the civil and military officials of the imperial court were in the other party's hands. Since the other party had come here and behaved so brazenly, it was obvious that this was an ultimatum. The slightest disagreement would result in a massacre, and even the emperor himself would not be able to bear the consequences of such an extreme action. Yun Xiaoyao paled bit by bit. He had exhausted all his means, but he still could not locate the other party's location. The other party was like a gust of wind. Although he knew that he was hovering above the hall, he could not lock onto him. It was obvious that this person's cultivation base was far above his own. Not only could he not locate the other party, even if he was lucky enough to come into contact with him, he would have to return empty-handed. The other party obviously knew what His Majesty was plotting. After waiting for a while, he said faintly, "King Yun is known as Yutong's unrivaled expert. Your skills are indeed unparalleled. It's a pity that people like us from the mountains still have a few tricks up our sleeves to preserve our lives. I'm afraid King Yun will have to waste his efforts to find us, won't it?" His Majesty's heart suddenly went cold. He said in a low voice, "What do you want?" The moment he said this, all the civil and military officials in the hall felt a strong sense of humiliation wash over them. They were in the hall of the highest level of the country, yet they were being threatened in such a straightforward manner. The voice said, "We only wish to cooperate closely with His Majesty the Emperor. That's all." The Emperor took a deep breath and said, "I need time to discuss with the officials. I believe His Majesty will not make us wait for too long, right?" The voice said indifferently. The Emperor closed his eyes and said in a flat voice, "Not bad. If that's the case, this commoner will come again tomorrow to listen to Your Majesty's teachings." The voice smiled faintly and then went silent. There was silence in the hall for a long time. Everyone's faces were ashen, and their eyes were filled with anger. That indescribable humiliation filled everyone's heart. The generals were all clenching their fists in anger. The civil officials' faces were purple, filled with righteous indignation. His Majesty was silent for a moment before he said, "Today's incident has made me completely understand one thing." No one spoke. Only the Emperor's voice reverberated in the hall. "I understand now. This world is a world where martial arts are respected. In this world, martial arts is higher than imperial power. It is not something that can be ignored just because we do not value it. I only hate that I don't have invincible martial arts in this world. It's better to have fists than power." His Majesty said tiredly, "I am tired. Let's end the court." He said that he needed to discuss with the officials, but he didn't have the authority to discuss it. Therefore all the officials were speechless. If there was to be a discussion, it could have been done since everyone was here just now. The reason why it was pushed back for a day was to reclaim the last bit of dignity, the last bit of face, to keep a thin veneer. The school of Kismet State understood this, so they did not push it too far. Therefore he left immediately. He would never have thought that this one day's grace would cause such a serious consequence. Even if it was only 2 hours, the school of Kismet State would still not be officially recognized by Yutong within these 2 hours. At that moment, His Majesty and Yun Xiaoyao waited quietly in the palace. In another 4 hours, the school of Kismet State's men would arrive. Both of them understood that Supreme Cloud must not be allowed to return at this time. It was not a big deal to be temporarily threatened now. While it would be a taboo to go back on one's words and reputation, there was no room for discussion at certain times and in certain positions. On the contrary, once Supreme Cloud returned and confronted these people, the consequences would be unimaginable. If Supreme Cloud were to be killed, it would be the end of everything. As long as Supreme Cloud was still alive, there would be room for his ability to improve. One day he would be able to finish off the school of Kismet State just like how he dealt with the Four Seasons Tower. This was the hope that Yutong could pin on. Therefore, His Majesty the Emperor was prepared to endure the humiliation for the greater good. A moment of forbearance would ensure his survival for 100 years. They'll be here soon. They can come at any time. Perhaps they're already waiting in the Orem Hall. Yes. I can't believe that you and I have to face something like this on the eve of the world's unification. It's hilarious indeed. I'm probably the first, perhaps the only, emperor who has the hope of unifying the entire continent. This younger brother has nothing to say. Yun Xiaoyao was so ashamed that he almost died at once. He could not help but feel ashamed. Compared to others, he, the publicly acknowledged unrivaled expert of Yutong, needed to be ashamed and responsible. It's all right. However, from now on, I'm going to revise the nation's basic policy, His Majesty said softly with his eyes half closed. Yun Xiaoyao was rather puzzled by the Emperor of Yutong's words. It was at this moment that they saw a person coming from the corner with quick steps. Both of them were stunned. Qiu Jianhan. The person who had come was Qiu Jianhan. Both the Emperor and Yun Xiaoyao wore expressions of surprise on their faces. How could both of them forget Qiu Jianhan's expression when he left the court yesterday, his gaze like lightning. He was so furious that he was trembling all over, barely able to walk out of the hall. Unable to hold it in any longer, he fell to the ground, spitting blood. As a veteran general who had been through hundreds of battles, it was needless to say that he was as determined as fire with age. Today, however, he had to endure such humiliation together with the emperor he had served in the Orient Hall of his own country. This was intolerable to Qiu Jianhan. However, he could only endure it no matter how much he could not. Once he acted recklessly, the price he would have to pay would be the demise of Yutong's entire imperial court. It would be the same as announcing the demise of Yutong. Qiu Jianhan suppressed his rage, holding it in until his heart was about to explode. Finally reaching his limit, he fell to the ground, spitting blood just as he stepped out of the hall. If he had not received Yun Yang's endless divine art to recuperate his body previously, this indignation would have suffocated the old marshal to death. He still could not take it now. After being sent back to his residence by the emperor's men, he was bedridden immediately, but he was still mumbling to himself, "The emperor is humiliated, the official must die. The official only hates the fact that I've neglected my martial skills all these years. I hate it, I hate it." Both of them did not expect Qiu Jianhan, who was supposed to be severely injured and barely able to get up, to appear here now. "Elder Qiu, why have you come?" Yun Xiaoyao was the first to ask. Qiu Jianhan's expression was dark as he said, "This official has something important to discuss with His Majesty." Hearing this, the emperor was startled, as was Yun Xiaoyao. Then, his eyes shone as he replied, "Since it's an important matter, it should be dealt with immediately. Let us go to the royal study to talk." Before his words echoed in the air, he had already pulled the emperor and left swiftly. Strictly speaking, this action was immensely rude. No matter how close Yun Xiaoyao and the emperor of Yutong were, even if they were brothers, there was still a difference between a ruler and his official. Yun Xiaoyao should not have made any decisions, let alone pulled the emperor away. The emperor's thoughts raced, a glint of contemplation flashing across his eyes. Then his gaze brightened as well. He did not resist and left with the flow. In the royal study, Qiu Jianhan, who stood in front of both of them, was suddenly shrouded in mist. When the mist dissipated, his appearance had changed. His brows were sharp, his eyes bright, his robe fluttering in the wind. The person before him was none other than Yun Yang. Chapter 787. Now, he had turned into Qiu Jianhan's appearance with the help of his cloud manifestation and had come here in secret. His Majesty stood up abruptly and asked anxiously, "Why are you back? Didn't I tell you not to come back?" His voice was unusually anxious and inexplicable. There was also a tinge of exasperation. Yun Yang smiled easily. It's all right. No one knows that I'm back." While the emperor heaved a sigh of relief, another wave of pressure weighed down on him. Yun Yang had returned. To Tiantang City and the Empire of Yutong, this outcome was both good and bad at the same time. If someone with ulterior motives found out, the consequences would take a drastic turn for the worse. It would be unimaginable. "What's the situation now?" asked Yun Yang. Sigh, the emperor sighed dejectedly. "No matter what, as long as Supreme Cloud is still here and the empire's faith remains strong, it's a good thing. Yun Yang, don't be impulsive and act recklessly." Yun Yang nodded and said, "I won't be impulsive, I won't act recklessly. Tell me directly." "The situation is like this. Yesterday's morning assembly?" Yun Xiaoyao recounted what had happened yesterday, his face turning ashen as he spoke. After that, the plan to attack the school of Kismet State was temporarily put on hold. Yun Yang fell into silence after hearing the emperor's words. He did not speak for a long time, like a silent volcano that was about to erupt. "The school of Kismet State." Yun Yang finally spoke, his voice cold and emotionless. "They said that they're here today to ask for an answer, right? That's what they said, isn't it?" His Majesty turned around in shock. "Supreme Cloud, do you know what you're representing now? If you're impulsive, Yutong will be finished. Since you have the ability to sneak into the palace without everyone's knowledge, you can leave safely as well. Bear with this for now." Yun Yang said seriously, "I won't be impulsive, but I don't have to bear with it all the time either." He sucked in a deep breath and said, "We can do this and that." As he spoke, the emperor and Yun Xiaoyao's eyes lit up, growing brighter and brighter. At the same time, the vague thought in His Majesty's mind became clearer and clearer. When Yun Yang was done with his calculations, His Majesty heaved a long sigh, feeling like the boulder in his heart had been completely released. He smiled in relief and said, Yunyang, I was thinking of conferring an official position on you. It looks like there's no need for that now. Yunyang could not help chuckling. Fortunately, you didn't reward me. I've never been suited to be an official. Yes, your current status is even higher than mine. His Majesty laughed heartily. Remember the first time I saw you, I only felt that you were a little slippery. The second time I saw you, I was sure that you were a little foppish. The third time I saw you, I felt that you were a little shrewd. The fourth time I saw you, I was suspicious because of your magical detoxification skill. However, the fifth time I saw you, all my suspicions were dispelled by your father. Until now, after so many twists and turns, it turns out that my initial guess was right. Yunyang said respectfully, Your Majesty is wise. Yunyang is impressed. Wise my foot. I'm so wise that I've been fooled by these fellows like a fool. If it was anyone else who said this, I would at most feel that they didn't mean what they said, but coming from your mouth I only feel ashamed, so ashamed that I can't even show my face. The emperor rolled his eyes and glared at Yun Xiaoyao, his anger still lingering. Yun Xiaoyao coughed awkwardly. It was as if the stain of his concealing Yun Yang's identity this time would probably never be forgotten by his royal brother for the rest of his life. His Majesty then turned his head and warned, Your plan is indeed thorough, but there is always the slightest chance. Do not take any risks. If anything goes wrong, you must leave at the first instant. Saving your own life is the priority. Do you understand? Yes, survival comes first. Yun Yang could clearly feel the change in His Majesty's attitude this time. It was a fundamental change. Before this, the Emperor had wanted to find Supreme Cloud and control him. After all, an unconventional force that exceeded the imperial authority was a great threat to His Majesty. To those in power, it could not and should not exist. Therefore, there was a barrier between the 9 Supremes and Yutong's royalty. It was only because Yun Yang had expressed his understanding and did not mind that it did not trigger a greater conflict. In spite of this, the feeling of barrier had vanished without a trace. The ambition to control everything was nowhere to be found. What replaced it was a magnanimity that allowed all rivers to flow into the sea. Facing Yun Yang now, not only was there no longer the feeling of being in control, there was also an inexplicable sense of respect. Yes, it was respect. In spite of this, Yun Yang did not feel flattered by the Emperor's respect. He was composed and at ease. As Supreme Cloud's unparalleled achievements, Yun Yang was unperturbed by all forms of respect. The palace issued a royal edict, summoning the civil and military officials for a meeting. Everyone was ordered to rush to the palace within 2 hours. The civil and military officials walked out of their homes one after another, their faces pale and somber. There was not a hint of calmness in them. Everyone still remembered the humiliation they had suffered yesterday, but the deadline was approaching. Did His Majesty have to admit defeat in front of all the civil and military officials? This was going too far. At the same time, in the same throne room, the same number of people, including Qiu Jianhan, who had vomited blood and was bedridden yesterday, Fang Qingtian and the others who had been bedridden the moment they returned, now, all of them were standing in the throne room. Although their faces were sallow and they were panting heavily with blood stains at the corners of their mouths, not a single one of them was missing. We are Yutong's officials. When His Majesty rules the world, we accompany him, looking down on the world. When His Majesty rules the world, we accompany him, dominating Tianxian. However, when His Majesty is humiliated, we are also here, smiling at the thorns. Looking at the civil and military officials gathered in the hall, His Majesty felt a surge of warmth in his heart. This is one of my trusted subjects. They are also my right-hand men. His Majesty sat on the throne with a grim expression. The ministers and aristocrats beneath him were equally grim. The main purpose of summoning all of you today is still about yesterday's matter. The Emperor's expression was grim. Regarding the school of Kismet State, how should the imperial court confer the title? I need all of you to give your opinions and discuss this. Silence. There was a moment of deathly silence. All the civil and military officials in the imperial court were panting heavily, but not a single one of them spoke. At this moment, even the officials who usually formed cliques for personal gain, even the officials who were insatiably greedy and overbearing, even the ones who were unrestrained in their demands, no one made a sound. An indescribable silence, mixed with a sense of humiliation that came from the bottom of their hearts, gradually spread throughout the hall. His Majesty was not in a hurry. His hawk-like gaze scanned each and every one of them and said slowly, "No one speaks? Don't worry, there's no hurry. There's still time. We can discuss slowly." Chapter 788. Still no one spoke. Why aren't you speaking? I've already spoken. The one who should feel the most humiliated now should be me. I thought that I was wealthy, that I could rule over Yutong or even the entire Tianxian land, that the land under the heavens belonged to the emperor, that those who ruled the land belonged to the emperor, that my words were the law, that my orders were strictly enforced, that no one dared to disobey. However, even after I had all these, I still had to watch the entire imperial court suffer such humiliation. Usually, all of you form cliques for personal gain, eliminate dissidents, deceive your superiors and subordinates, sell positions and titles, trample on human lives, play favoritism and fraud. Aren't all of you quite the troublemaker? Why, when someone humiliates the entire empire, are you all silent? His Majesty's choice of words was unusually sharp and straightforward. They were like sharp, red-hot steel needles that pierced deep into the hearts of all the officials present. What you all think of as high positions and generous salaries, high positions and authority, glory and splendor, ruling over a region, taking charge of an area. What are they when faced with absolute military force? What can they do? All of you who actively participated in the shady ways for personal gain, the clean stream of the parties and the sects of the literary school, are nothing in the face of absolute power. Can a tongue as sharp as a knife really kill such an existence? What you think of living a long life, having children and grandchildren, leaving your name in history and being remembered for eternity, what are they when faced with absolute military force? Can you prevent your entire family from being wiped out in one day? His Majesty's voice grew colder. I have a feeling. This feeling is uncomfortable, but it's very real. It's right before my eyes right now. His Majesty stood up and paced back and forth in front of the dragon throne. He said calmly, I feel that this so-called conquering the world and unifying the continent is a lofty goal in our eyes, but in the eyes of some people, it is like a tiger watching a bunch of ants fighting each other, competing to be king, watching a bunch of ants killing each other until their blood flows like a river and their bones pile up like a mountain. As for this tiger, it just watched mockingly from the side as if it was looking at a joke. When this tiger had some kind of idea, it directly went down the mountain and rushed into the ant nest. It rushed into the middle of a group of leading ants. It only needed to say one sentence, respect me. If you don't obey me, I'll kill you all. Therefore, the group of ants who were celebrating and elated were suddenly stunned. Then, I realized that there was no other way but to yield in this situation. And so, this group of ants, who had experienced countless battles and rivers of blood and mountains of corpses, gave up, and surrendered. His Majesty's cold voice seemed to have come from the depths of hell, bringing with it a bone-piercing chill. This is how I feel right now. I am just a slightly stronger ant, the leader of a group of ants. His Majesty said mockingly, and now I still have you, us ants. After so much bloodshed, when we were about to celebrate and feel glorious, we met the tiger. The tiger is here. Therefore, all the ants dared not to make a sound. His Majesty raised his finger and pointed at them one by one. He said fiercely, a bunch of ants. Including me, all of you. He turned around and pointed his finger at his chest. He tapped it heavily, making a thumping sound. He shouted, a bunch of ants. Everyone lowered their heads and countless officials had tears streaming down their faces. These two words had never been like today. They were like two giant hammers smashing into their hearts. Who would have thought that these two words would be used on them? I am an ant. Turns out I am an ant. The atmosphere in the hall was oppressive like an impending storm. All sounds were solemn. It was then that a clear voice spoke faintly, Your Majesty is too humble. Although the school of Kismet State is somewhat capable, we are only Your Majesty's officials. How dare we overstep our boundaries? It was still the same voice from yesterday, calm and emotionless. But it was no exaggeration to say that this voice had been echoing in the minds of all the civil and military officials since yesterday, including in their dreams. It was like the whisper of a demon, causing everyone to hate it to the bone and feel pain in their hearts. Since the Empire of Yutong was founded so many years ago, be it the enemy or the opposing faction, there had never been anyone like this voice that could garner the common hatred of all civil and military officials and factions. Even Yutong's top enemy Han Sanha, or the Shengguan family of generals' nemesis, the late emperor of the Empire of Zhou Zicheng, had never received such treatment. In spite of this, the owner of this voice had received this honor within a very short period of time after he spoke. All the civil and military officials in the imperial court, including the emperor, were filled with hatred. Since you have come with a purpose, why don't you show yourself? His Majesty said in a displeased tone, Are you afraid that someone as weak as us can keep you here? The voice chuckled faintly. Of course, this lowly one isn't worried that I can't escape unscathed. Your Majesty is the saint of a generation, about to unite the world. As an enlightened emperor who has created an unprecedented feat, how can you harbor any murderous intent towards an idler like this lowly one and degrade yourself for no reason? The reason why I haven't shown myself before your Majesty is because this lowly one feels that my description is vulgar. Wouldn't that be a great sin for this lowly one? The emperor said faintly, but you all insist on not showing yourselves. How do I confer titles on you? The voice was taken aback. Confer titles? The emperor heaved a long sigh and said, I've thought about it for a whole night. After much deliberation, I've come to a conclusion in my helplessness, a little bit of recognition. Although the empire of Yutang is unparalleled and has the potential to conquer Tianxian, we still lack a supreme martial force to intimidate us. This makes the so-called sovereign of the world reveal its shortcomings, and it's hard to truly live up to its name. The voice hummed in agreement, obviously interested in what the emperor of Yutang had to say, and was rather moved. A wise man will speak the truth. I do not like the methods and style that your sect has displayed. I believe that any ruler or emperor would not like it. The emperor's face showed an expression of disgust that was not hidden at all. The voice said, Your Majesty, we are also helpless against the current situation. The difficulties we face are difficult to express. We will explain it to your Majesty slowly in the future. I hope that your Majesty will bear with it for now. We will talk about it in the future. The voice sounded a little anxious. It was obvious that the conferment just now had attracted his full attention. Naturally, it was his top priority to reduce or even put an end to the resentment of his superior. Although they were powerful and unparalleled in Yutang, they still lacked a righteous and legitimate title. This was the easiest thing to obtain in the past battles for supremacy, but they had bet on the wrong treasure this time, causing them to lose their title completely. Chapter 789. The school of Kismet State's most taboo flaw was that they did not have a legitimate reason to do so. If not for the fact that they had no other choice, they would not have gone to such extremes and coerced others with force. It was contemptible. However, seeing that the situation of the world had already gone out of control and that the fates of the heavens were no longer on their side, they became anxious. In spite of this, if Yutang's emperor could change his mind and confer titles on the school of Kismet State, it would be equivalent to patching up the last shortcoming of their current actions. Therefore, when they heard the word confer, their eyes shone instinctively. They were no longer as calm as they had been before. Instead, they were filled with excitement. The emperor's face darkened as he said, From the meeting a few days ago as well as what I know today, I already know that the strength and prestige of your noble sect is profound. It is truly extraordinary and without equal in the present age. Thus, we began to think, if your esteemed sect can change its style, no longer persisting in its tyrannical ways, we might consider conferring upon your esteemed sect the title of Protector of the State Religion, allowing it to spread its teachings throughout the world. Since then, the Empire of Yutang and your sect have supported each other. The Empire of Yutang has a long life, and your sect's legacy will never end. The voice said emotionally, Thank you, Your Majesty, for your magnanimity and generosity. We will definitely do our best to protect Yutang's empire forever. The emperor lightly said, However, I have never seen any sincerity from your sect. In reality, you haven't even shown yourselves. What sincerity is there to speak of? I can't even see him, so how can I confer a title on him? I can't just confer titles to the school of Kismet State out of thin air in front of the entire imperial court, can I? Thank you, Your Majesty. I understand what Your Majesty is worried about. I will go and report to the sect leader and ask him to come and pay his respects to Your Majesty. We will discuss important matters together. I am afraid, Your Majesty, please wait for a moment. The emperor took a deep breath and said, I also hope that your sect can be more courteous. I am the ruler of this world. The voice repeated, Of course. Don't worry, Your Majesty. Don't worry. Then there was no more sound. It was obvious that he couldn't wait to go and report. In the main hall, the atmosphere was still solemn, and the expressions of the ministers were still very ugly. Everyone knew that although His Majesty had spoken forcefully just now, as long as he agreed to the conferment, it would be a compromise, it would be submission. It was still a great humiliation. At most, it was just an additional layer of cloth, nothing more. How could it help? In the deathly silent atmosphere, the emperor waited with a solemn expression. However, there was a deeply hidden gratification in the depths of his eyes. The generals were all filled with righteous indignation, their temples throbbing and their eyes spitting fire. However, the civil officials all felt the same sense of humiliation. That indescribable anger was an important reason for the emperor's comfort. This is the soul of the empire. If this incident could end in Yutong's favor, the cohesiveness of Yutong's imperial court would rise to a whole new level. There would no longer be any gaps. The emperor of Yutong's words had probably hit the nail on the head of the school of Kismet State. Not long after, a clear voice rang out. The current leader of the school of Kismet State, Shimen Huanyu, together with his disciples, requests an audience with His Majesty, Emperor of Yutong. May His Majesty live long. The emperor said calmly, permitted. Just as his voice trailed off, there was a soft hum in the hall. 6 silhouettes appeared out of thin air. The leader had a lean face and a lanky build. He had 3 long strands of beard that made him look otherworldly. He stood quietly in the hall, but he gave off the feeling that he was an immortal who had left the world behind. It was as if he could detach himself from the mortal world and ascend to immortality at any time. This was probably the so-called sage-like demeanor that resembled that of a deity. As for the other 5 people who had come with him, each of them was quite graceful and handsome. At first glance, they gave off an indescribable, favorable impression from the bottom of one's heart. The emperor's eyes glowed with admiration almost instinctively as he asked warmly, Shimen Huanyu? Yes, this lowly one. The leader of the school of Kismet State smiled faintly, poised and composed as he said, These 2 beside this lowly one are my left and right guardians, Jiao Buqi and Meng Wuliang. These 2 are my elders, Ping Shishui and Hai Wujiang. As for the last one, he is this lowly one's unworthy junior brother and also the one who has been talking to your majesty, Kong Tianbua. Jiao Buqi and Meng Wuliang looked like middle-aged men while Ping Shishui and Hai Wujiang looked like elders. As for Kong Tianbua, he looked to be in his 30s, handsome and elegant. The 6 of them bowed in unison. Greetings, your majesty. You may rise. His Majesty smiled and said, The school of Kismet State is indeed full of talents. Just looking at the 6 of you is enough to inspire admiration. As expected of the top hidden sect in the world. You live up to your reputation, you live up to your reputation. This lowly one dares not accept your majesty's praise. His Majesty waved his hand, growing more amiable. Sai, what's there to be afraid of? The school of Kismet State has a long history, having gone through countless years since the beginning of time. It's not an exaggeration to say that it's the top sect in the world. Leader Shimen, may I ask how many disciples there are in the school of Kismet State now? Shimen Huanyu did not hesitate as he answered even more respectfully, Each generation of the school of Kismet State's disciples is limited to 360 people. This is in line with the 360 heavenly cycles. The emperor asked, 360 people? This number is a little too little. It's out of my estimation. Shimen Huanyu smiled. Your Majesty, the 360 people this lowly one mentioned earlier are only the first generation of disciples. It's not that this is the number of the entire school. There are 6 generations of disciples in the school. Counting from the first generation to the 6th, the total number is 2,180 people. The emperor smiled. Is still a little too little. When your school becomes Yutong's national guardian in the future, you'll have your responsibilities. I'm afraid you'll need to expand your manpower. Hearing the emperor's words, Shimen Huanyu was completely relieved. He could not help the corners of his lips curling into a smile. As the saying goes, time changes. Now that our school has been recognized by your Majesty, we'll naturally follow your Majesty's orders in the future. The emperor said, it's rare that the leader isn't someone who sticks to the rules. It's appropriate that you're so receptive to good advice. I'd like to make another presumptuous request. I wonder if the school of Kismet State can consider the royalty's children and the capital's noble family's children when they recruit disciples in the future? Shimen Huanyu was even more relieved. This lowly one shall remember your Majesty's words and consider them carefully. However, the school's recruitment of disciples prioritizes their aptitude. Since your Majesty has instructed, this lowly one shall obey. When the time comes, we'll first pick disciples from the range your Majesty has designated. As long as they meet the requirements, we'll take them in and nurture them wholeheartedly without reservation. The emperor smiled happily. That's great. I believe that your school will be able to nurture countless talents for the empire. How wonderful. He laughed and said, my dear ministers, what do you think? Is this a good thing? Wonderful. Ah. The spacious Aurora Hall was silent for a moment. No one responded. Chapter 790. A chill suddenly flashed through Shimin Huanyu's eyes. The current situation was clear and obvious. Although His Majesty had agreed to the School of Kismet State's position for the sake of the bigger picture and had even changed his mind to seek closer cooperation and connection, which was undoubtedly a good sign, the School of Kismet State's actions had still offended everyone in Yutong. At least, the civil and military officials before him still held a grudge. They would need to work on this for a considerable period of time before they could truly enter Yutong's upper echelon. As for those who are stubborn, we have ways to deal with them. Shimin Huanyu's spiritual sense enveloped the entire hall, so he could clearly sense everyone's reactions. Naturally, he knew that there was no other expert in the hall other than Yun Xiaoyao. There was no threat at all. He was confident that even if people like Ling Xiaozue and Mr. Nian were to hide here, he would be able to discover them in an instant. This had nothing to do with cultivation base, but was a secret art unique to the School of Kismet State. Since there were no fluctuations, then there was nothing at all. The faint vigilance in his heart was finally put down. His Majesty seemed to have fully accepted the School of Kismet State. He was not at all offended by the disharmony in front of him. He was even nonchalant as he said with a smile, "Esteemed experts, I wonder where you will be staying after coming to Tiantang this time? Where will you stay? Your people will definitely be stationed in Tiantang in the future, you must plan ahead." Shimin Huanyu chuckled and said, "The people of the wilderness are at ease wherever they go. It's fine as long as they settle down anywhere." His Majesty laughed heartily and said, "Experts do things as they please. Since that's the case, let's start the conferring ceremony immediately. Issue the decree." Before he could finish, a eunuch had already walked out with the imperial edict. Once he stood still, he announced loudly, "Everyone from the School of Kismet State, heed the edict." No matter how arrogant they were, no matter how unworldly they were, no matter how peerless they were, when they personally appeared and heard something like an imperial edict, they still had to formally kneel down and listen. Especially since the School of Kismet State had a favor to ask and considered themselves as Yutong's subjects, they had to be even more respectful, not daring to be the slightest bit negligent. If he didn't even give face to His Majesty, then, what kind of cooperation would there be in the future? What was there to talk about? What was there to discuss about the School of Kismet State's fundamental purpose? How could he win the trust of others if he only spoke empty words without any real action? No matter what, he had to get the title first. With that in mind, the 6 members of the School of Kismet State did not hesitate at all. They knelt down in unison the moment the eunuch announced the decree. By the will of heaven, the Emperor has decreed that the School of Kismet State has a long heritage. The Emperor of Yutong's imperial edict was lavishly worded, praising the School of Kismet State's achievements. Every word and sentence delighted Shimin Huanyu and the others. The school's mission had finally come to Yutong this time, and they could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. Could it be that the so-called end of the world was just a process of things turning from extreme to extreme, and a brighter future of our sect was right in front of us? Because of this, the School of Kismet State is specially conferred as Yutong. By the time the imperial edict was read to this point, the School of Kismet State and the others were in a state of euphoria. It was a crucial moment, so they instinctively perked up their ears and listened attentively. However, at this delicate moment, without a sound, a faint cloud of mist suddenly dissipated in the air above the hall. Then, 2 beams of sword light suddenly appeared in the sky, instantly illuminating the entire hall with a splendid radiance, boundlessly magnificent. Following closely behind the 2 beams of sword light was a flash of saber light that was imbued with an ethereal sense of agility. The saber light shimmered like stars, as if all the stars in the firmament had gathered here and shone together, glorifying Yutong. The attack this time was unpredictable. The 6 of them knew that it was absolutely safe. Shimin Huanyu had also secretly informed them that there was no threat here. However, an earth-shattering change suddenly occurred. The ambush of these 3 people could not be evaded even if they focused their attention. What more when it happened right in front of them and they were caught off guard? Swoosh swoosh swoosh. 3 beams of blood shot into the sky one after another. They were Jiao Buqi, Meng Wuliang, Kong Tianbua, and the others. Before they could even react, their heads had already been separated from their bodies and they had perished. Even until their deaths, their faces were still immersed in the excitement of being conferred just now. Excitement was written all over their faces. Peaceful water, boundless sea, and Shimin Huanyu, the leader of the School of Kismet State, reacted swiftly and leaped up to meet the attack. However, due to the unexpected turn of events, each of them had a wound so deep that their bones could be seen. Blood gushed out. "Who is it?" Shimin Huanyu's eyes were about to split open. How could he not know that he and his team had fallen into the most vicious trap? The Emperor of Yutong's proclamation was not to confer titles to the School of Kismet State, but to set up a trap. The goal was to lower the School of Kismet State's wariness to the lowest level before annihilating them in one fell swoop. Based on this point alone, it was not considered a treacherous scheme that exceeded everyone's expectations. Looking at all the strange and overt plots that the School of Kismet State had encountered and seen for the past 10,000 years, they were at least child's play, if not insignificant. What truly shocked Shimin Huanyu was the three people who had acted in this plot. The cultivation base of these three people was not only profound, but each of their cultivation base was on par with his. Two of them even surpassed him by a notch or two. This was an absurd, incomprehensible, and unbelievable reality. There were no experts in Yutong. Shimin Huanyu was confident that he had found out about this. This was further confirmed by Yutong's unrivaled expert, Yun Xiaoyao, yesterday. This was also the main reason why the School of Kismet State had acted so brazenly in the past few days and had entered the palace openly today. Shimin Huanyu was confident that even if Yutong was unwilling to be threatened and had set up an ambush, he and his team would be able to react at once and counterattack. To him, Yutong's palace was like walking on flat ground. There was no danger at all. After what had happened yesterday, Shimin Huanyu was even more relieved. After all, if Yutong had another unparalleled expert, the Emperor of Yutong would have attacked long ago when he was threatened to this extent. It was impossible for him to watch from the sidelines. Furthermore, the ability of Yutong's most formidable martial expert, King Xiaoyao, might have already entered the ranks of the world's top-notch experts. However, it was not in the eyes of the School of Kismet State. If this was the extent of Yutong's higher-ups' ability, no matter what kind of trap, ambush, or plot they had, it would not amount to much. That was why he dared to come here without hesitation. What was more, he had just checked with the school's arcane method. How did the three of them hide? His mind was a mess. There was only one question in his mind: how was this possible? How could these three people hide under his detection? Chapter 791. Shimin Huanyu had always been wise, always planning before taking action. As the leader of the School of Kismet State, he had been highly respected all these years and no one dared to defy him. He could be said to be the wisest man of his generation. Now, the sudden appearance of the three experts had stunned him. Half of the 6 people from the School of Kismet State who had arrived were killed in the blink of an eye. Even the 3 lucky survivors were all heavily injured, and their battle prowess had been completely extinguished. Such a devastating loss was unprecedented in the long history of the School of Kismet State. Who are you? Who are you? Hai Wujiang parried the attacks hurriedly, his body constantly injured and blood spattering. He roared in terror, his voice filled with terror. The person who was fighting him was swaying back and forth like a phantom. A chilling voice rang abruptly. Didn't the School of Kismet State investigate before coming to Yutong? Don't you know that Yutong's guardian is called Supreme Cloud? Supreme Cloud? His ability? How can he be so powerful? Hai Wujiang roared. Supreme Cloud definitely doesn't have such formidable ability. That's why I said that you all didn't investigate properly before this. I really don't know what your school, which claims to have a legacy of 10,000 years, is relying on. Have you all lived your lives in vain? Yunyang said coldly, forget it, forget it. Once you've gone underground and become a malicious spirit, information won't matter anymore. Rest in peace in the underworld. Then he hollered, see that? The 18 abysses of hell. A glint of saber light flashed as 8 eerie Azura hells appeared in midair. After the battle that day, Yunyang, who had been baptized by actual combat, had obviously improved his comprehension of saber truth. Destiny Blade. Within a single move, the number of Azura hells had increased to 8. The countless malicious spirits contained within them seemed to be about to surge out with a howl. Hai Wujiang could not defend himself against such a vicious move. With a cry, his body was severed into 2 and he was sent off like a ghost. On the other side, Ling Xiaozui's dense sword light shrouded Ping Shishue within it. Ping Shishue's cultivation base was inferior to Ling Xiaozui's, and he was caught in a disadvantageous position. He tried his best to hold on, putting up a desperate fight, but fear was already written all over his face. Ling Xiaozui, why is it you? Why is it you? This person's cultivation base was extremely high, but compared to Ling Xiaozui he was still much weaker. Ling Xiaozui's expression was cold as he said faintly, since the beginning of time in Tianxin, the imperial power has never been manipulated by martial sections. The position of the continent's overlord is not a pie that can be manipulated by those with ulterior motives. Did the school of Kismet State think that it could be controlled just because it had existed for too long? You who have violated the rules of Xiozha can be eliminated. Ping Shishui shouted repeatedly, but new wounds appeared on his body one after another. Fresh blood spurted from his mouth, and it was obvious that he couldn't hold on for much longer. His demise was imminent. Those who stand in my way shall die. Among the 3 battles, the only one from the school of Kismet State who was not at a disadvantage was Shimin Huanyu's side. He was bathed in blood and his expression was ferocious. His graceful and carefree demeanor a moment ago was long gone and nowhere to be seen. Facing Dugucho, he attacked with all his might like a madman, but Dugucho was like an unshakable mountain that stood before him. Dugucho's defense was solid, rendering all his attacks futile. Strictly speaking, Shimin Huanyu's cultivation base was extremely high. If he had not been injured and fought Dugucho in a fair fight, even if he could not defeat the latter in the end, he could have at least exchanged 1,000 blows with the latter. However, the situation now was different. Not only was he injured from the ambush, but the disciples he had brought with him had also died. Everything that had happened had long shaken him and thrown him into disarray. How could he be lucky when facing a veteran unrivaled expert like Dugucho? If Dugucho had not thought that victory was within his grasp and did not want to take the risk to drag the battle out, he would have seized the opportunity to counterattack and end the battle. As Shimin Huanyu's relentless attacks were futile, the moment his mind cleared up, he saw the corpses of Hai Wujiang, Jiao Buqi, Meng Wuliang, Kong Tianbua, and the rest lying on the ground. How could he not know that the situation was hopeless? With a sudden roar, his sword light grew unprecedentedly bright. He charged toward the emperor without a care for his own safety. Everyone's heart skipped a beat. That was their only chance of survival. Only by holding the emperor hostage could they have a chance to escape. Dugucho spun, his sword swung horizontally and with a flick, a sword mountain materialized and came crashing down. It sealed off all of Shimin Huanyu's paths of advance. Unexpectedly, Shimin Huanyu's move was actually a diversionary tactic. When he saw that the mountain of swords was about to descend upon him, he leaped into the air and with a spin of his body, 3 clones appeared. They were like 3 streaks of light streaking through the sky as they rushed out of the hall, trying to escape. This man was a wise man. His wish of holding the emperor hostage was too beautiful, but it was difficult to realize. Instead, he made a feint and fled with all his might. Seeing that Shimin Huanyu was about to escape, Dugucho's sword light expanded abruptly and blocked one of the rays. With a flash of lightning, a shadow was cleaved into 2. Ling Xiaozue flew over in a slanted manner, the tip of his sword grazing Ping Shishui's neck. As a large head flew up, it also blocked a ray of light. Then the sword wind whistled and tore the head into dust. However, the last third streak of light had already rushed to the entrance of the hall with unparalleled speed. With just one more step, they would be able to soar into the vast sea and soar into the sky. Whether it was Ling Xiaozue or Dugucho, they could not stop it in time. At this moment, a murderous aura filled the hall. Yun Yang's voice rang out once more. Slaughter the world. So what? While his voice was still echoing, a dazzling sword light suddenly appeared in the world in an extremely stunning manner. It also rushed out at an unparalleled speed. The speed of this sword light far exceeded the speed of lightning. It was a swordsmanship. Yun Yang, who had always used the saber, had actually executed a swordsmanship at this critical juncture. The murderous aura of this swordsmanship was immense, the malice was heavy and the power was unrivaled. It made Ling Xiaozue and Dugucho, who had witnessed this swordsmanship, feel a chill run down their spines. Their hearts chilled as they shuddered uncontrollably. Every single strand of hair on their bodies stood on end. What a terrifying technique. Just as Shimin Huanyu, who had flown out of the hall, felt a sliver of relief when he saw the regal veranda move, he suddenly felt his heart palpitate, followed by a chill in his chest. He, who was flying at high speed in the air, subconsciously looked down, only to see a shiny sword tip suddenly poking out of his chest. The cold light was dazzling and it was stained with bright red blood. Shimin Huanyu's eyes bulged. I've been stabbed? How could this be? Chapter 792. Then a spurt of blood gushed out violently. It was also at this moment that Shimin Huanyu felt as if his entire body had been struck by lightning. In that instant he lost all of his strength. His consciousness had almost completely dissipated, and he no longer had any control over his body. Relying on inertia, he slid weakly through the air for over 10 meters before falling down with a whoosh. As he fell, Shimin Huanyu's body twitched. He lifted his head with all his might and looked back, murmuring, "Who killed me?" Oh. In his eyes, there was a young man dressed in purple with the setting sun behind him, making him look extremely radiant. Shimin Huanyu squinted his eyes and tried his best to look, but the sunlight was so bright that he couldn't see clearly. He, who was nearing the end of his life, could only feel his body growing lighter and lighter, as if he had melted under the sunlight. The youth's purple silhouette seemed to be carrying the entire sun on his back, making his silhouette appear even larger and more majestic in the shadow. "It was me." The youth's voice was cold. "I killed you?" Shimin Huanyu's consciousness gradually blurred. He chuckled bitterly. Great sword skill." His head tilted to the side and he fell silent. At this point, the souls of the 6 people from the school of Kismet State had all returned to the netherworld and were on their way to the underworld. Clap, clap, clap. Crisp applause rang out. His Majesty, who was dressed in a bright yellow robe, walked out of the hall slowly and applauded. Excellent. Everything seemed to have happened too abruptly and the entire process was too short. It was only then that the civil and military officials seemed to have come back to life. The atmosphere was instantly heated up. "I see. I was wondering, that's right. With Supreme Cloud here, how could these clowns succeed? I can finally breathe a sigh of relief. How satisfying, how. All hail Supreme Cloud." On the other side, Ling Xiaozue and Dugu Cho exchanged glances, feeling disgruntled and aggrieved. *Sike. Both of us have contributed a lot in this battle, haven't we? Why did all of you only see Supreme Cloud? Without both of our help, how could this battle have ended so smoothly with Yin Yang alone? Could it be that both of us, the unrivaled experts, are invisible in your eyes? Yes. The 6 leaders of the school of Kismet State were all captured in one fell swoop, completely annihilated. Qiu Jianhan, Fang Qingtian, and the rest of the elders felt like they had regained the last radiance of the setting sun, their faces brimming with joy. In fact, they were not the only ones. All the civil and military officials in the court were beaming with joy, their worried expressions swept away. He had never felt such great satisfaction before, and he had never felt such pleasure. After a few heartfelt words of gratitude, His Majesty pulled Yun Yang aside and said softly, "Well, if the roots are not removed, the weeds will grow again." It was obvious that the emperor was still wary and concerned about the remaining forces of the school of Kismet State. He did not hide his intention to wipe out the latent threat. Even though the higher-ups of the school of Kismet State had been annihilated, leaving them without a leader, the overall combat strength of this reclusive sect was too high. Even the strength of those who were left was enough to make the secular dynasties wary. They could easily become a source of extreme instability. We don't have to annihilate them all. Let's see if we can try to divide a portion of them. There should be a portion of them that can be used by the nation. The Grand Tutor suggested softly with a frown. The Grand Tutor's words were righteous. There was no right or wrong in power, only the person who wielded it. If Yutong could really take the school of Kismet State's forces for its own use, it would be greatly beneficial and significant. Even if it was only a portion, it would be a significant boost to Yutong's capability. His Majesty said faintly, "I don't think there's a need for that. It was difficult to control an overly powerful external force. Stability should be the priority now. No matter how tempting the fruit was, it could only be compatible with a certain level of capability." Yun Yang said, "If so, the school of Kismet State shall cease to exist from this world. A sect that threatened the imperial authority and all the officials in the imperial court would become a thorn in everyone's flesh, a nightmare at night, even if only one person remained." There were only 2 outcomes for the school of Kismet State to embark on this path: success or a complete failure. If they succeeded, they could continue and even grow stronger, but if they failed, the only path left for the school was to be completely annihilated. The survival of the school of Kismet State was decided by the words of the Emperor of Yutong and Yun Yang. It had been a long time since Yun Yang and the other 2 had left, but the Emperor and the officials were still agitated. "I've made a new decision," His Majesty said. "Throughout history, the imperial court has mainly chosen scholars for the examinations. They're used to reading poetry and literature, but there's a flaw that can't be overlooked. Scholars are well-read and knowledgeable, but their limitations are too great. Once they encounter an attack of absolute force, no matter how knowledgeable they are or how good their character is, it's useless. They can only sigh helplessly, unable to do anything. Although the martial sciences are offered every year, strictly speaking, it's just muddling through and perfunctory. The so-called selection of talents is only from a fixed number of noble children. It can be said that the possibility of truly skilled martial artists serving the nation has been completely eliminated. His Majesty said, "I wish to reopen the martial sciences." These sudden words could be said to be earth-shattering. Although the courtiers knew that His Majesty had received an unprecedented shock from this incident, these words still made the courtiers feel dizzy. Set up a ranking of 18 weapons and a ranking of martial strength. The nation will recognize them and grant them corresponding titles. The emperor said, the ranking, the nation's official rank, what restraints are needed, what functions are needed, what systems and rules are in place. I'll leave it to all of you to figure out the specific operation. His Majesty said, I'll leave this to old Grand Tutor, old Grand Commandant, and the others to discuss and come up with a plan as soon as possible. There was a pause before his tone turned serious. This will be Yutong's basic national policy from now on. It will never change. I don't wish to see anyone slacking on it. He said heavily, word by word, I do not wish to be humiliated like this again. I'll give all of you half a year to complete this agreement. Carry it out to the world. His Majesty left after he finished speaking. The officials exchanged looks of bewilderment. As the saying went, one word from the top would cause the people below to break their legs. His Majesty could be unreasonable and only seek results, but what if the officials did the same? If they did well, they would punish them for deceiving the emperor. Inaction would never do. As the person directly involved in this matter, the Grand Preceptor was stunned. After being stunned for a long time, he rushed towards Fang Qingtian in exasperation. Grand Commandant, you have been with His Majesty for the past few days. I want to know what is going on. Fang Qingtian rolled his eyes and said, It's not just me. Weren't you there as well? What's going on is what's going on. The Grand Tutor said angrily, This is reopening the martial sciences, and the rewards are so heavy, how can this be? Since ancient times, there have been many examples of heroes breaking the law with their martial arts. Now that we've set an example. Fang Qingtian said angrily, the evidence of heroes breaking the law with their martial arts is right before our eyes. Everyone here is a witness just now. What else is there to say? Do you think everyone is blind? However, how can cultivators be restrained? It's still cultivators who can do it. Besides, since heroes have broken the law with their martial arts, there are also scholars who have broken the law with their literature. Why didn't you say anything? Was the disturbance that all of you worked together to deal with a few days ago caused by scholars who broke the law? Why don't all of you scholars who have been in the imperial court for thousands of years, take the initiative to resign? Why don't all of you get lost first and talk about the rest? You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.